The security guard's jaw shattered against the metal bedrail before anyone realized the dying old man had moved. Blood sprayed across white sheets as alarms shrieked. Three more guards rushed the frail figure who just disarmed a 240-pound man with one brutal strike. "Perimeter breach!" the patient roared, eyes wild with terror no sedative could touch. Doctors screamed for restraints. Nurses fled. But one woman saw what others missed: the precise angles of his defensive strikes, the tactical breathing, the way his trembling hand still maintained a fighting stance. This wasn't dementia. This was a soldier who never left the battlefield. Before we begin, I invite you to follow this story to the very end. Please like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story has traveled across the world. The fluorescent lights of Mercy Hill General Hospital hummed their usual monotonous song, but room 347 had become a war zone. Sarah Chen pressed her back against the corridor wall as another crash erupted from inside, the distinctive sound of medical equipment meeting hospital floor. She'd been a nurse for 7 years, worked everything from overdoses to gang shootings in downtown Detroit, but something about the chaos spilling from that room made her instincts scream danger in a language she'd almost forgotten. "Get the fucking sedative ready!" Dr. Marcus Webb's voice carried through the doorway, sharp with the kind of authority that came from never being questioned. "I don't care if he's 80. He just put Jenkins through a goddamn wall." Sarah moved closer, her soft-soled shoes silent on the linoleum. Through the narrow window in the door, she could see the scene unfolding like a training video on what not to do. 4 security guards surrounded the hospital bed where a skeletal man couldn't weigh more than 140 pounds soaking wet, held them at bay with nothing but positioning and presence. His hospital gown hung off sharp shoulders, IV lines dangled uselessly from his arms where he'd ripped them free, and his bare feet were planted in a stance that made Sarah's breath catch. She knew that stance, had seen it 10,000 times growing up. "Mr. Cross, you need to calm down." Dr. Webb circled wide, syringe held high like a trophy. "We're trying to help you." "Elliot," Sarah whispered to herself, reading the chart holder mounted beside the door. "Elliot Cross. No listed family, no emergency contacts, brought in unconscious 3 hours ago. Diagnosis: acute psychological episode, possible dementia, recommend immediate psychiatric evaluation." But the man in that room wasn't having an episode. He was executing a defensive perimeter with the kind of precision that came from muscle memory, older than most of the hospital staff. The largest guard, Jenkins, apparently recovered from his wall meeting, lunged from the left. Elliot's response was instantaneous and brutal. He didn't just dodge, he redirected, using the bigger man's momentum against him, sending him stumbling into a crash cart that went over with a spectacular crash of metal and supplies. 2 other guards rushed simultaneously, and Elliot's movements became a blur of controlled violence: elbow to solar plexus, palm strike to sternum, leg sweep that sent both men sprawling. "Jesus Christ," Dr. Webb stumbled backward. "Call Phoenix PD. Get a psychiatric hold authorized. This man is—" "defending high ground," Sarah finished quietly, pushing through the door before her brain could override her instincts. Every head turned toward her. Dr. Webb's face flushed an ugly red. "Nurse Chen, I didn't authorize—" "Room's too crowded," Sarah said, keeping her voice level, her hands visible and non-threatening. "You're triggering him. Everyone needs to step back." "Triggering him?" Webb's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "He's a violent dementia patient who's assaulted 4 members of my staff. Step back, Nurse Chen, or you're next on his list." But Sarah was already moving, slow and deliberate, angling away from Elliot's blind spots. The old man's eyes tracked her with predatory focus. Not the clouded confusion of dementia, but the crystal-clear awareness of someone running threat assessments in real time. She could see it now. What everyone else had missed: the scan patterns, the way he kept his back to the wall, the controlled breathing through the panic. "Unit designation!" Elliot's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, rough with disuse but carrying unmistakable command. The room went silent. Dr. Webb stared. The guards exchanged confused glances. Sarah's mouth went dry. She knew what he was asking, knew the weight of those 2 words, had heard her father bark them at fellow veterans in the rare moments when the past crashed into the present. But she'd never been cleared for that knowledge, never been part of that world. She was just the daughter who'd learned to read the signs, to understand the language of men who'd seen things that broke the usual rules of reality. Sarah, what the hell is he talking about? Webb moved closer, syringe raised. Step aside. Now. But Elliot's eyes were locked on Sarah and she saw it. The flicker of recognition, the desperate hope that someone, anyone, would understand. His hands were shaking now, not with age or fear, but with the effort of holding back whatever demons were clawing at his mind. Sweat poured down his face, soaking the thin hospital gown. His lips moved soundlessly, and Sarah realized he was counting, the kind of tactical countdown soldiers used to maintain control when the world stopped making sense. 5, 4, 3. Dr. Webb, Sarah said softly, not breaking eye contact with Elliot, I need you to clear the room. Are you out of your mind? He's having a combat flashback, Sarah interrupted, finally saying it out loud. And everyone in this room is making it worse. Those aren't random strikes. That's close quarters combat training. He's not attacking. He's defending against what he thinks is an enemy assault. Webb's face went from red to purple. Nurse Chen, I'm ordering you to... Look at his scars. The words hung in the air. Webb hesitated, and in that moment of silence, Sarah pointed to the old man's exposed left shoulder where the hospital gown had torn during the struggle. Puckered tissue ran in diagonal lines, shrapnel wounds, she knew, because her father had similar ones he'd never explained. Elliot's right forearm bore the distinctive circular scar of a field-stitched bullet wound. His collarbone jutted at an angle that suggested it had been broken and reset without proper medical care. Those aren't from a car accident or a fall, Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. That's combat damage. Old combat damage. And something's triggered his training response. This is ridiculous, Webb started, but Elliot moved again, a slight shift that put him into a different defensive position, one that Sarah recognized from the grainy videos her father had forbidden her to watch, but she'd found anyway, late at night in the family computer room. Special operations. The kind of training that wasn't supposed to exist. Vietnam? Sarah asked softly, directing the question at Elliot. The old man's jaw clenched. Classified. Gulf War? Classified. But his breathing had changed, slowed slightly. He was listening. The mountains? Elliot's eyes widened, just a fraction, and Sarah knew she'd hit something. Not where, not when, but the terrain. Mountains meant something specific, something that made his hands tighten into fists. Dr. Webb grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her back toward the door. That's enough, Nurse Chen. You're relieved of duty. Report to administration immediately. You're making a mistake. The only mistake was letting you near this patient. Webb nodded to the guards. Escort Nurse Chen out of this wing. Then we sedate Mr. Cross and transfer him to psychiatric lockdown. The guards moved toward Sarah, uncertain but obedient. She let them guide her toward the door, but her eyes never left Elliot. The old man was watching her retreat, and something in his expression made her chest ache. The look of a soldier being abandoned by the only person who'd tried to understand. As they pushed her into the hallway, Sarah heard it, barely a whisper, but clear enough to freeze her blood. Broken arrow. She stopped so suddenly that the guard behind her nearly knocked her over. What did you say? But Elliot had returned to his defensive stance, eyes scanning the room's corners, hands ready. Dr. Webb was advancing with the syringe, talking in that patronizing voice doctors used when they'd already decided a patient was beyond reason. Broken arrow, Sarah repeated, the words tasting like rust and cordite on her tongue. Her father had said those words exactly once, when she was 16 and foolish enough to ask what his nightmares were about. He'd gone white, grabbed her shoulders, and made her swear never to speak those words aloud. She'd looked it up later. Military code for a unit or asset in critical danger, surrounded, requesting immediate assistance. Nurse Chen, you need to leave. Now. The head of security, Martinez, his name tag read, was trying to be gentle, but his grip on her arm was firm. Sarah's mind raced. I need to make a phone call. You can call from administration. It's an emergency. She pulled free, surprising Martinez with the sudden movement. That man isn't just a veteran. He's... She stopped because she couldn't finish that sentence without sounding insane. He's still on a mission. He's defending something we can't see. He's waiting for extraction that's never coming. Behind them, Elliot's voice rose again, no longer shouting but speaking in the clipped, controlled tones of someone giving combat commands. Tango at 3 o'clock. Need suppressing fire on the ridge. Where the fuck is air support? He's completely delusional, Webb was saying to the guards. Hold him down. They rushed Elliot together, 4 large men against one skeletal old soldier, and what happened next would be replayed in Sarah's nightmares for years. Elliot moved like water, like smoke, like something that had forgotten how to be fragile. His knee connected with a guard's liver. His elbow found another's temple. He used their weight against them, their numbers turning into a liability in the confined space. It was beautiful and terrible and wrong on every level because his body was failing even as his training carried him through the motions. She could see blood soaking through his hospital gown, fresh blood from wounds that were tearing open with every movement. "Stop!" Sarah screamed. "You're killing him!" But they had him now, numbers and youth overwhelming decades of muscle memory. Elliot went down hard, 4 men pinning him to the floor, and Dr. Webb moved in with the syringe. Sarah watched the needle descend toward the old man's neck and felt something inside her make a decision her conscious mind hadn't authorized. She ran, not away from the room, but into it, shouldering past Martinez, dropping to her knees beside Elliot's head. His eyes found hers, and she saw the terror there, the kind that had nothing to do with the guards and everything to do with being back in whatever hell his mind had transported him to. "Listen to me," Sarah whispered, close enough that only he could hear. "Listen very carefully. Your mission is complete. The package is secure. Extraction is on the way. Do you understand? Extraction is inbound." Elliot's struggling stopped. "Confirm package secure?" Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She was making this up, speaking in a language she barely understood, but something in his eyes told her he needed to hear it, needed someone to speak the words that would end whatever operation his mind was still running. "Package is secure," she confirmed, her voice steady despite the insanity of the conversation. "Friendly's on site. You're done, soldier. You're home." "What the hell is she doing?" Dr. Webb's voice came from somewhere above. "Get her out of here!" But Elliot's breathing had changed again. The rapid combat panting giving way to something deeper, more controlled. His eyes cleared, just slightly, and when he spoke his voice was different, older, more tired, but undeniably present. "Who gave you the extraction code?" Sarah's mind went blank. She didn't know any extraction codes, didn't know military protocol or classified procedures. She was just a nurse who'd grown up watching her father's silence, learning to read the language of trauma in the set of shoulders and the distance in eyes that had seen too much. "I don't have a code," she admitted quietly. "But I know what it looks like when someone's still fighting a war that ended years ago. And I know you need this to stop before you hurt yourself more than you already have." For a long moment, Elliot just stared at her. Then, impossibly, his lips twitched into something that might have been a smile if it hadn't been so sad. "You don't know shit," he said. But the fight had drained out of him. His body went slack under the guard's hands, and when Dr. Webb administered the sedative, he didn't resist. The guards released him slowly, watching for another attack that didn't come. Elliot's eyes stayed on Sarah as the drugs began to work, pulling him down into unconsciousness. His lips moved, forming words that she couldn't quite hear over the commotion of the medical team rushing in to assess the damage. "Everyone out!" Dr. Webb commanded, already cataloging injuries with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd made his diagnosis and wasn't interested in alternative theories. "Nurse Chen, you're suspended pending review. That was the most unprofessional display I've ever witnessed." Sarah stood, her knees protesting after kneeling on hard floor. "He's bleeding." "Of course he's bleeding. He just assaulted 4 people." "No." Sarah pointed to the spreading stain on Elliot's hospital gown, high on his left side. "That's not from this fight. That's old bleeding, fresh but old." "When did he get here?" Webb followed her gaze, and his expression shifted from anger to concentration. 3 hours ago. Found unconscious in an alley off Camelback Road. No ID, no wallet. Assumed homeless population, possible assault victim." He lifted the gown carefully, and they all saw it. A field dressing, crude but effective, covering what looked like a bullet wound. "Jesus," one of the guards whispered. "Is that—" "Gunshot wound," Webb confirmed, his voice tight. "Recent. within the last 48 hours. He looked up at Sarah and she saw the first crack in his certainty. How did you know? The way he was moving, Sarah said, protecting his left side. That's not psychological training, that's physical pain driving tactical decisions. She moved closer, ignoring Webb's protest, and examined the wound dressing. It was military grade, the kind of quick clot bandage that didn't come from civilian first aid kits. Someone with medical training dressed this, recently. We need to report this to the police. Webb was already moving, reaching for his phone. Gunshot wounds are mandatory reporting. This could be gang-related, drug-related. Or it could be exactly what he said it was, Sarah interrupted. Classified. Webb stared at her like she'd suggested the moon was made of cheese. Nurse Chen, you can't possibly believe... The lights went out. Not flickering, not brownout. Total darkness that swallowed the room in an instant. Emergency lighting kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing everything in red, and in that crimson glow, Sarah saw Webb's face go pale. That's not normal, he said unnecessarily. Martinez's radio crackled to life. All units, we have a situation in the main lobby. Unknown individuals requesting access to patient records. They're claiming federal authority, but won't show proper identification. Security to main lobby, code black, repeat code black. Code black. Sarah had been through the training scenarios. Active threat, possible armed intruders. She looked down at Elliot's unconscious form and felt ice crystallize in her stomach. They're here for him, she said. That's absurd. Webb started, but another voice cut through, amplified and authoritative, echoing from the hospital's PA system. This is a federal emergency. Mercy Hill General is now under government jurisdiction. All staff are to remain in current positions. Do not attempt to leave the building. Do not use phones or communication devices. Compliance is mandatory under national security protocols. The voice was smooth, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its calm certainty. Webb's phone buzzed, a text message that made him go even paler. He showed it to Sarah. Patient in room 347 is federal asset. Surrender immediately. Do not attempt treatment or transport. What the fuck? Webb whispered, all his medical school composure crumbling. What the actual fuck is happening? Sarah moved to Elliot's bedside, checking his vitals with hands that wanted to shake but couldn't afford to. His pulse was steady, breathing regular despite the sedation. But that wound in his side was still seeping blood, and she could see other injuries now, bruises in the pattern of restraints, not from tonight's struggle but from days ago. Rope burns on his wrists, a cut on his scalp that had been glued shut by someone who knew field medicine but wasn't worried about cosmetic results. We need to move him, she said quietly. Are you insane? Webb gestured at the darkened corridor beyond the room. You heard the announcement. Federal jurisdiction means... It means whoever shot him is coming to finish the job, Sarah finished, and they're using official channels to do it. Martinez stepped forward, his hand moving to his sidearm in a gesture that was pure instinct. Ma'am, I don't know what you think you know, but I'm not letting anyone take a patient from this hospital without proper authorization. They'll have authorization, Sarah said. Probably have paperwork that looks perfect. Probably have credentials that check out. And probably the second they get him alone, Elliot Cross stops being a problem they need to solve. The radio crackled again. Main lobby reports multiple vehicles, SUVs with government plates, men in suits. They're heading up. Security, we need... Static drowned out the rest. Webb was backing toward the door. This is above my pay grade, way above. If they're federal, we hand him over and he dies, Sarah said flatly. That wound is infected. He needs antibiotics, fluids, proper treatment. You hand him over to people who already tried to kill him once. You're signing his death warrant. You don't know that. Look at his chart, Sarah snapped, grabbing the tablet from the bedside table. No next of kin, no emergency contacts, no social security number on file, no insurance, no nothing. He's a ghost, Dr. Webb. The kind of ghost the government makes when it wants someone to disappear. Martinez's radio erupted with shouting, overlapping voices, and then a sound that made everyone in the room freeze. Gunfire. Distant but unmistakable, the rapid crack, crack, crack of automatic weapons. Oh God, Webb breathed. They're shooting in the hospital. Sarah didn't think, couldn't afford to think. She grabbed the IV stand, started hooking Elliot back up to fluids, her hands moving through protocol on autopilot while her mind raced ahead. The service elevator at the end of the wing, the tunnels underneath that connected to the old part of the hospital, the maintenance exit that led to the parking structure. "Nurse Chen, what are you doing?" "My job," Sarah said. "I'm protecting my patient." "From the federal government?" "From whoever put that bullet in him." She looked up at Martinez. "You can help or you can get out of the way, but those men downstairs aren't here to follow hospital policy." Martinez's jaw worked for a moment. Then he unholstered his weapon, checked the magazine, and positioned himself by the door. "Service elevator?" "Service elevator," Sarah confirmed. Webb threw up his hands. "You're both insane. I'm reporting this. Elliot's eyes snapped open. Everyone froze. The old man should have been unconscious for hours with the dose Webb had given him, but he was awake, alert, and his hand shot out with surprising speed to grab Sarah's wrist. "How many?" His voice was rough but clear. "How many what?" Sarah asked. "Hostile contacts." "How many men?" We don't know. Reports say multiple vehicles, suits. They're claiming federal—" "Victor Hale," Elliot interrupted, the name dropping like a stone into still water. "Silver hair, expensive suit, talks like a senator but moves like a killer. Is he with them?" Sarah shook her head. "We can't see the lobby from here." Elliot was already moving, ripping out the fresh IV line Sarah had just placed, swinging his legs off the bed despite the obvious pain it cost him. His hospital gown fell open, revealing a topography of scars that told stories Sarah couldn't begin to guess at. "If Hale's here, we have maybe 3 minutes before they breach this floor. If he's not, we have less. Either way, we move now." "You're in no condition to—" Webb started. "I've been shot 6 times, stabbed twice, and left for dead in 4 different countries," Elliot cut him off. "This isn't even top 5 worst days. Nurse, what's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Chen." "Sarah Chen, you seem smarter than your doctor here. Do you have combat medical training?" "Just standard nursing." "Good enough. Grab a field kit, antibiotics, bandages, anything portable. Security?" He nodded at Martinez. "How many rounds you carrying?" 15 in the magazine, 1 in the chamber." "Won't be enough." "But it's what we've got." Elliot tried to stand and nearly went down. Sarah caught him, surprised by how light he felt, how fragile despite the iron will keeping him upright. "Shit. Okay, new plan. You're going to have to get me to the exit. I'll talk you through the route." Dr. Webb was edging toward the door. "I'm calling security. The real security. Hospital administration, someone who can sort this out properly." "You do that," Elliot said, not taking his eyes off Sarah. "And when Hale gets here, you tell him I was already gone. Tell him I had help from staff who didn't know any better. Give him a description that's wrong. Buy us time." "Why would I—" The question died as the sound of gunfire grew closer. No longer distant echoes, but close enough to distinguish individual shots, and with them, screaming. Webb ran. Just bolted through the door and disappeared down the corridor, and Sarah couldn't even blame him because every instinct she had was screaming the same message. "Get out. Run. This is wrong. This is dangerous. This is how nurses end up dead on the evening news." But Elliot's hand on her arm was steady, and when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see the confusion of earlier. She saw clarity, purpose, the kind of focus that came from knowing exactly what needed to happen next. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "This isn't your fight. You can walk away right now, and I won't blame you. But if you stay, if you help me, you need to understand what you're getting into. These people will kill you just for being in the way. No hesitation, no remorse. You'll be collateral damage in a war that officially doesn't exist." Sarah thought of her father, silent and haunted until the day he died. Thought of all the questions she'd never asked, all the understanding she'd never quite grasped. Thought of the medals in his dresser drawer that he'd never displayed, the commendations he'd never framed, the parts of his life that existed in classified files she'd never be allowed to read. "What unit?" she asked. Elliot's expression shifted, something like respect flickering across his weathered features. "Shadow Company, designated SC-7. We didn't exist on any official roster, the kind of unit they send when plausible deniability matters more than success rates." And Victor Hale? Our handler, the man who erased us when we learned too much. Elliot's smile was bitter as old coffee. 32 operators went into those mountains. 2 came out. Hale told the world the mission never happened, told our families we died in training accidents, scattered lies, covered graves. He's been cleaning up loose ends ever since. The elevator dinged at the end of the hall. That's our ride or our death, Elliot said. Choose now. Sarah grabbed the emergency medical kit from the wall, slung it over her shoulder, and wrapped Elliot's arm across her shoulders. I'm choosing to keep you alive long enough to make sure that bastard pays for what he did. Martinez held the door, weapon raised, and together they moved into the corridor. Behind them, the sound of boots on tile grew louder, methodical and terrifying in their precision. Ahead, the service elevator waited, doors open, interior lights flickering in the emergency power. They were 5 steps from safety when Elliot whispered, "Down." Sarah dropped without thinking, pulling the old man with her, and the window behind them exploded in a shower of glass as bullets punched through from the stairwell. Martinez returned fire, the thunderous reports of his pistol deafening in the enclosed space, and Sarah half-dragged, half-carried Elliot toward the elevator. They fell through the doors just as Martinez threw himself after them, his hand slapping the button for the basement level. The doors began to close, agonizingly slow, and through the narrowing gap Sarah saw them. Men in tactical gear, moving with the fluid precision of professional soldiers, weapons raised and trained on the elevator. The doors sealed shut just as another volley of gunfire rang out. The elevator shuddered, began its descent, and in the sudden quiet that followed, Sarah realized she was shaking. "You did good," Elliot said, his voice strained with pain. "Real good. Now comes the hard part." "What's the hard part?" Martinez asked, checking his ammunition. Elliot's laugh was dark and humorless. "Staying alive long enough to make any of this matter." The elevator descended into darkness, carrying 3 people into a nightmare that was just beginning, and Sarah Chen, nurse, daughter of ghosts, keeper of a dying soldier's last fight, realized that she'd just crossed a line from which there was no return. Above them, Mercy Hill General Hospital transformed from a place of healing into a battlefield, and somewhere in that chaos, a man named Victor Hale was coming to finish a war that should have ended decades ago. The elevator's descent felt like falling into a grave. Emergency lighting painted everything in shades of red and shadow, and Sarah could hear Elliot's breathing growing more labored with each floor they dropped. His weight against her shoulder had increased, not much but enough to tell her that adrenaline was no longer sufficient to keep him upright. "How bad?" she asked, not looking at him, keeping her eyes on the floor indicator as it ticked down past ground level. "I've had worse hangovers," Elliot said, but his voice carried the hollow quality of a lie told more from habit than conviction. Martinez ejected his magazine, counted rounds with the quick efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. 11 left, maybe 12, if I'm lucky, and 1 didn't feed right. He looked at Elliot. "How many shooters we talking about?" "Hale never travels with fewer than 6. Probably brought 8 for a hospital job, enough to control multiple floors, establish perimeter, handle resistance." Elliot coughed, and Sarah saw blood fleck his lips. Internal bleeding, she thought, or the gunshot wound tearing further. "They'll have the main exits covered, service entrances, parking structures, standard containment protocol." "So we're trapped," Martinez said. "We're motivated," Elliot corrected. "There's a difference." The elevator shuddered to a halt at B2, the lowest basement level, reserved for maintenance, storage, and the old pneumatic tube system that had been obsolete for a decade but never properly removed. The doors opened onto a corridor that smelled like disinfectant and forgotten spaces, lined with pipes that rattled and hummed with the building's mechanical heartbeat. Sarah helped Elliot out, and immediately his knees buckled. She caught him, lowering him against the corridor wall with as much care as urgency allowed. "I need to look at that wound." "No time. Make time, or you'll bleed out before we get anywhere." Sarah was already opening the medical kit, pulling out gauze and antibiotics. "Martinez, watch the elevator." The security guard positioned himself with his weapon trained on the closed doors, and Sarah tore open Elliot's makeshift field dressing. What she saw underneath made her stomach clench. The gunshot wound was clean entry, no exit, which meant the bullet was still inside him. The infection was already setting in. She could see the telltale redness, feel the heat radiating from inflamed tissue. Whoever had dressed this had done so quickly, focused on stopping the bleeding rather than proper treatment. "When did this happen?" she asked, cleaning the wound as gently as speed allowed. 43 hours ago, give or take," Elliot hissed as she applied antiseptic. "Albuquerque. I was extracting a data drive from a secure location. Hale's people were waiting. They knew I was coming. Someone tipped them off. Someone always tips them off. That's why there's only 2 of us left from Shadow Company." His eyes were closed now, head tilted back against the concrete wall. "The other survivor is Marcus Webb." Sarah's hands froze. "Dr. Webb? Our Dr. Webb?" "Wouldn't be our anything if I had my choice, but yeah. Marcus was our combat medic, best field surgeon I ever saw. Could stabilize a sucking chest wound with duct tape and prayer." Elliot's laugh was bitter. "After the mountains, after Hale erased us, Marcus decided to go legitimate. Medical school. Respectable career. Probably convinced himself that if he pretended hard enough, the past would stay buried. He recognized you. It wasn't a question. The second I woke up in that room, saw it in his eyes, pure terror. He knew if I was here, if I was injured, it meant Hale wasn't done cleaning house." Elliot opened his eyes, and the weight of his gaze made Sarah pause in her bandaging. "Webb's a coward, but he's not stupid. He ran because staying meant choosing sides, and he chose his comfortable life over doing the right thing 30 years ago. Doubt that's changed." Martinez's radio crackled, voices shouting, overlapping, panic in every syllable. "All units, basement levels are being sealed. Unknown hostiles have control of security office. Repeat, they have our cameras, our access codes, everything." The transmission cut off, replaced by static. "We need to move," Martinez said. Sarah finished the bandaging with quick, practiced motions. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold. She injected Elliot with a dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics that probably violated a dozen protocols, then helped him to his feet. "Where are we going?" "Maintenance tunnel, east side. Leads to the old hospital wing, the part they abandoned when they built the new tower." Elliot pointed down the corridor, past storage rooms and rusting equipment. "From there, we can access the utility tunnels that connect to the city's infrastructure. Phoenix has a whole network underneath, steam, water, electrical. Most of it dates back to the 60s before they cared about security or monitoring. They moved as quickly as Elliot's condition allowed, which wasn't fast enough. Sarah could hear sounds above them now. Boots on metal stairs, doors being forced open, the systematic sweep of a building being locked down by professionals who'd done this before. Martinez took point, weapon raised, checking corners with the nervous energy of someone who'd signed up for hospital security and gotten a war zone instead. The maintenance tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall panel that Elliot seemed to know intimately. He pressed 3 specific points in sequence, and the panel swung open on hinges that squealed in protest. Beyond lay darkness, absolute and complete, the kind that came from spaces where light was a visitor rather than a resident. "Tell me you have a flashlight," Sarah said. Martinez pulled one from his belt, clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a tunnel that stretched beyond the light's reach. Pipes ran along both walls, some wrapped in crumbling asbestos insulation, others bare and weeping condensation. The floor was concrete, cracked and uneven, with puddles of water that reflected the flashlight beam like scattered mirrors. They were 10 steps into the tunnel when Sarah heard the elevator doors open behind them, back in the corridor they'd just left. Voices carried in the enclosed space, calm, professional, speaking in the clipped shorthand of tactical teams. "Basement 2 clear. Blood trail heading east. They're wounded, moving slow." "Copy. Team 3, seal the south exit. Team 4, access the tunnel system. No one leaves this building." The voice that responded made Elliot go rigid. "Victor," he whispered. Sarah looked back through the gap in the false panel and saw him, silver-haired, impeccably dressed even in the chaos, moving with the casual confidence of someone who owned whatever space he occupied. Victor Hale studied the blood drops on the corridor floor with the detached interest of a man examining an insect, then looked up. And for a heartbeat, Sarah could have sworn he was looking directly at her through the darkness. "Elliot," Hale called out, his voice carrying effortlessly. "I know you're close. I can smell the desperation. Why don't we skip the theatrics? You're dying. Your nurse friend is in over her head. The security guard has, 10 10 rounds left? This doesn't end with you riding off into the sunset. It ends with you bleeding out in the dark while I walk away clean. Again. Martinez grabbed Sarah's arm, pulled her deeper into the tunnel. Elliot followed, his hand pressed against the wall for support, leaving dark smears that would be easy to track. They moved 30 yards before the tunnel branched, left toward the old hospital wing, right toward what looked like a service shaft leading even deeper underground. Left, Elliot breathed. Old wing has exits. That they'll have covered, Martinez interrupted. If they're professionals like you say, they'll expect the obvious routes. So we go down? Sarah looked at the service shaft. A ladder descended into darkness, and the air rising from below carried the smell of stagnant water and rust. That doesn't look like it leads anywhere good. It leads to the steam tunnels, Elliot said. From there we can access the city grid. But it's a maze down there. Easy to get lost, easy to get trapped. He coughed again, harder this time, and Sarah saw more blood. I can barely walk. I'll slow you down, probably get you killed. You two should— Don't, Sarah cut him off. We're not having that conversation. You know something they'll kill to keep secret. That makes you worth keeping alive. Behind them, flashlight beams played across the tunnel walls, voices growing closer. The tactical team wasn't rushing, didn't need to. They had time, resources, and the building locked down tighter than a prison. Martinez made the decision for them, already moving toward the service shaft. Down, now. We can argue about it when we're not about to get shot. The ladder was wet, slippery with condensation, and things Sarah didn't want to identify. She went first, Martinez following with the flashlight clenched between his teeth, and Elliot came last, his descent agonizingly slow. Every rung seemed to cost him, and twice Sarah thought he'd fall, but somehow he held on, muscle memory and pure stubbornness keeping him moving. They descended 30 feet before the ladder ended at a narrow platform. Beyond it, the steam tunnel stretched in both directions, wide enough for two people to walk side by side, tall enough to stand upright if you didn't mind the pipes running across the ceiling. The air was hot, humid, carrying the rhythmic hiss and clang of industrial systems that never slept. Which way? Martinez asked. Elliot slumped against the wall, breath coming in ragged gasps. East. About 300 yards, there's a junction. Take the north tunnel. Follow it for half a mile. You'll hit a maintenance access that leads to the central library. From there— He stopped, eyes losing focus. Elliot? Sarah moved to him, checking his pulse. Rapid, thready. The fever was spiking, infection spreading faster than the antibiotics could handle. Shit. We need to rest just for a few minutes. No time, Elliot insisted, but he didn't resist when Sarah eased him down to sitting. Hale's people will be in these tunnels in 5 minutes. They have thermal imaging, motion sensors, all the toys. We stay still, we die. We keep moving like this, you die anyway. Sarah was already digging through the medical kit, looking for anything that might help. She had morphine, but that would slow him down further. Had stimulants, but his heart couldn't take the stress in his condition. Had antibiotics she'd already administered. I need a hospital to treat you properly. The irony is not lost on me. Martinez was pacing, weapons sweeping the darkness beyond their small circle of light. We could try to reach the police, call for help. Hale owns the police response, Elliot said. At least the ones who matter. He's had 30 years to build his network. Judges, politicians, cops, anyone who can make problems disappear. You call for help, you'll get a SWAT team that puts bullets in all three of us and rules it justifiable. So what's the play? Martinez demanded. We can't fight them, can't hide from them, can't call for help. What the fuck are we supposed to do? Elliot reached into his hospital gown, somehow still wearing the ridiculous thing through everything, and pulled out a small device that looked like a USB drive wrapped in waterproof casing. We make sure this survives. Everything Hale did to Shadow Company is on here. Mission logs, kill orders, financial transactions, proof that our government used us for black operations and then erased us when we found out our targets weren't enemy combatants. They were journalists, activists, whistleblowers, people who threatened the wrong interests. Sarah took the drive, felt the weight of it. Such a small thing to have cost so many lives. Where did you get this? Stole it from a secure server in Albuquerque. The bullet in my side was the price of admission. Elliot's eyes locked on hers. That drive is why Hale is here. Why he brought a kill team to a hospital. Why he'll murder everyone in this building if it means recovering it. As long as I have it, I'm a threat. But if you can get it out, get it to the right people. Who are the right people? Sarah interrupted. You just said Hale owns everyone. Not everyone. There's a journalist, Elena Rodriguez, works for the Phoenix Chronicle. She's been investigating military corruption for years. Tried to interview me 6 months ago, but I was too paranoid. Elliot's smile was sad. Turns out paranoia was justified. Her office is in the Central Library building, 3 floors up from where that maintenance access lets out. You get that drive to her, she'll know what to do with it. You keep saying you, Martinez observed, like you're not coming. I'm not. Elliot's tone was matter-of-fact. I'm staying here. I'm going to make enough noise to draw Hale's people down this tunnel while you two go the opposite direction. Give you time to reach that access point. Get clear. That's suicide, Sarah said flatly. That's tactics. I'm dead already. Wounds infected, sepsis is setting in, and I'm pretty sure that bullet nicked something important because I've been pissing blood since hour 12. Best case, I've got maybe 24 hours before organ failure. Worst case, I've got less. He looked at her, and his expression was gentle. I've been dying since those mountains. This is just choosing how it ends. I'd rather it mean something. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist there was another way, but she'd seen enough terminal patients to recognize the truth when it was staring her in the face. Elliot Cross was dying. Had probably been dying since that bullet punched into him 43 hours ago. Everything since then had been borrowed time, and now the bill was coming due. What do you need? She asked quietly. Martinez's gun, the medical kit, and about 10 minutes to rig something that'll make them think twice about rushing this tunnel. Elliot was already moving, pain forgotten in the face of purpose. He took Martinez's weapon, checked the magazine, then started pulling supplies from the kit, alcohol swabs, oxygen canisters, anything flammable. There's a steam release valve about 50 yards back. I can jury-rig an explosive, nothing fancy, but enough to make them cautious. Buy you time. This is insane, Martinez said, but he was already helping, following Elliot's instructions to gather materials. Sarah just stood there, USB drive clutched in her hand, feeling the weight of what was being asked. She was a nurse. Her job was to save lives, not run away while a patient sacrificed himself. Every instinct she had was screaming that this was wrong, that there had to be another way, that she couldn't just walk away and let this man die alone in the dark. Hey, Elliot's hand on her shoulder, gentle despite the calluses. This isn't on you. None of this is. You've already done more than anyone had a right to ask. You saw me when everyone else saw a problem to be sedated. You listened when I needed someone to understand. That matters. You matter. I don't even know you, Sarah said, and her voice cracked on the words. You know me better than most. Better than Webb ever did. That's for damn sure. Elliot smiled, and for a moment Sarah could see past the wounds and the fever and the decades of trauma to the man he might have been in a different life. My real name is Elliot James Cross. I grew up in Montana, enlisted at 18 because I wanted to see the world. Ended up seeing parts of it that don't exist on any map. Did things I'll never be able to justify, even to myself. But the men in my unit, they were good people who trusted the wrong leadership. They deserved better than unmarked graves and official denial. So that's what you're carrying. Their names, their truth. Make sure it sees daylight. From above, the sound of the service shaft access being forced open. Voices echoing down. They had minutes, maybe less. Go, Elliot said, not unkindly. Elena Rodriguez, Phoenix Chronicle, Central Library. Tell her Broken Arrow sends its regards. She'll understand. Martinez was already moving, pulling Sarah with him. She went, because staying would waste the sacrifice, would make Elliot's death meaningless. They ran east through the steam tunnel, the heat oppressive and the air thick enough to choke on. Behind them, Sarah heard Elliot's voice rise in challenge, shouting coordinates and tactical positions that made no sense. And then she heard the gunfire start. The explosion came 30 seconds later, not massive, but loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling and send a wave of superheated air rolling through the tunnel. Sarah didn't look back. Couldn't look back. Just kept running, following Martinez's flashlight beam through the maze of pipes and shadows, each step carrying her further from the man who'd chosen to die, so strangers might live. They reached the junction Elliot had described, took the North Tunnel. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them, replaced by the mechanical symphony of the city's infrastructure, water rushing through pipes, generators humming, the electric buzz of transformers cycling power to buildings above. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, and Sarah's lungs were burning by the time Martinez's flashlight found the maintenance access ladder. "Up!" he gasped, already climbing. Sarah followed, muscles screaming, the USB drive tucked securely in her scrub pocket. The ladder led to a service corridor, which led to a stairwell, which led to the central library, 3rd floor. Late enough that the building was nearly empty, just a few students at study tables and a librarian sorting returns. They emerged from a maintenance door that probably wasn't supposed to be accessible to the public, and Sarah was suddenly absurdly aware of how they must look. Her in blood-stained scrubs, Martinez in a torn security uniform, both of them wild-eyed and gasping. "Can I help you?" the librarian asked, concern and suspicion warring in her expression. "Phoenix Chronicle offices," Sarah managed. "Where?" "4th floor, east wing, but they're probably closed." Sarah was already moving, Martinez close behind. They took the stairs 2 at a time, burst through the door marked Phoenix Chronicle, Investigative Division, and found themselves in a newsroom that looked like it had been decorated sometime in the 90s and never updated. Desks piled with papers, outdated computers, walls covered with clippings and photos connected by red string like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. One woman looked up from her computer, dark eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mid-40s, Sarah guessed, with streaks of silver in her black hair and the kind of intensity that came from too many stories that mattered and too little time to tell them all. "We're closed," she said, not unkindly. "Office hours are—" "Broken Arrow sends its regards," Sarah interrupted, and watched Elena Rodriguez's expression transform from polite dismissal to absolute shock. "What did you just say?" Elena stood slowly, like she was approaching something that might explode. Sarah pulled out the USB drive, held it up. "Elliot Cross sent me. Shadow Company SC7. He said you'd understand. He said—" Her voice broke. "He said you'd know what to do with this." Elena's hand shook as she took the drive. "Where is he?" "Elliot? Where is he now?" "Dead," Martinez said bluntly. "Or dying. Held off a kill team so we could get here. Man named Victor Hale is trying to bury this." "Victor Hale?" Elena's face went pale. "Former CIA liaison, current defense contractor, approximately a dozen shell companies, and enough political connections to make senators nervous." She looked at the drive, then at Sarah. "If this is what I think it is, if this contains what Elliot claimed to have—" "It does," Sarah confirmed. "Mission logs, kill orders, everything. Proof of illegal operations and murder to cover them up." Elena moved to her computer, inserted the drive, and her fingers flew across the keyboard. Sarah watched data populate the screen: files, documents, scanned images, video files. Thousands of items, each one a piece of evidence that officially didn't exist. "Holy shit," Elena breathed. This is everything. Names, dates, locations, financial transfers from offshore accounts, communications between Hale and military brass, orders to eliminate American citizens on American soil." She looked up and her eyes were bright with tears. "Do you understand what you've brought me? This is the story that ends careers and starts investigations and actually means something." "Can you protect it?" Martinez asked. "They killed to get it back. They'll kill again." "I can upload it to secure servers, distribute copies to multiple outlets simultaneously. By the time Hale realizes it's public, it'll be too late to suppress." Elena was already working, her movements quick and decisive. "But you two need to get out of here if they tracked you." The window exploded inward. Sarah hit the floor on instinct, glass raining down like deadly snow. Martinez grabbed her, pulling her behind a desk as gunfire erupted. Elena screamed, her computer monitor shattering, and Sarah saw men rappelling down from the roof, professional and precise, weapons trained on anyone who moved. "Drive!" Elena shouted, pulling a backup USB from her desk drawer. "I've got copies uploading, but if they destroy my hardware—" A bullet punched through the desk inches from Sarah's head. Martinez returned fire, his remaining rounds forcing the attackers to seek cover, but Sarah could see more shadows moving outside the windows. They were surrounded, trapped, and this time there was no dying soldier to buy them an escape. Through the smoke and chaos, Sarah heard a voice she recognized from the hospital corridors, amplified by a megaphone from somewhere outside. "This is a federal operation. All civilians exit immediately with your hands visible. Anyone remaining in the building will be considered hostile and treated accordingly." Elena met Sarah's eyes across the destroyed office. "I got 3 files uploaded before they cut my connection. 3 out of thousands. It's not enough. Not even close." "How long do you need?" Sarah asked. 30 minutes. Maybe 40 if I can access a different network. Root around their jamming. Martinez ejected his empty magazine. "I'm out of ammunition, out of ideas, and we're surrounded by guys with automatic weapons." He looked at Sarah. "I'm sorry. I got you this far, but I don't see a way forward." Sarah's hand went to her pocket, felt the USB drive Elena had given her, felt the weight of Elliot's sacrifice, the cost already paid, felt something inside her shift, some equation rebalancing. She'd spent her whole career being the good nurse, the one who followed protocols and didn't make waves and let doctors make the hard decisions. She'd watched her father carry his silence to the grave, watched Elliot choose death over surrender, watched Marcus Webb run away from the hard choice. She was done being the person who played it safe. "Elena," Sarah said, her voice steady despite everything. "If I can buy you 40 minutes, can you get the whole truth out?" "Sarah, no," Martinez started, but Elena understood. "Yes, 40 minutes and I can flood every outlet. Print, digital, international. I can make this too big to suppress." "Then that's the play." Sarah stood, hands raised, walking toward the shattered window where men in tactical gear were establishing positions. "I'm Sarah Chen, registered nurse at Mercy Hill General. I'm unarmed. I'm coming out. Don't shoot." "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" Martinez hissed. But Sarah was already climbing through the window, glass crunching under her feet, and she saw him standing on the street below, Victor Hale, silver hair perfect despite the chaos, watching her descent with the patient interest of a man who already knew how this story ended. She climbed down the fire escape, tactical team members following her every movement with their weapons, and when her feet touched pavement, Hale was there. "Nurse Chen," he said pleasantly, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Sarah reached into her pocket, pulled out the USB drive Elena had given her. Empty, she knew, just a decoy. But Hale didn't. She held it up, let him see it, and then threw it as hard as she could into the storm drain 15 feet away. Hale's composure cracked for just a moment, a flash of pure rage that transformed his handsome features into something ugly. And in that moment, Sarah smiled. 40 minutes, she said quietly. "That's all she needs, and there's not a damn thing you can do to stop it now." Hale's hand moved faster than she expected, and pain exploded across her face as he struck her. She went down hard, tasting blood, and through blurred vision she saw him gesture to his men. They moved toward the library entrance, weapons ready, and Sarah knew Elena's time had just gotten much shorter, but she'd bought her what she could. Bought her attention, confusion, precious seconds while Hale's people searched a storm drain for a drive that didn't matter. As rough hands pulled her upright and zip-tie cuffs bit into her wrists, Sarah Chen thought of Elliot Cross dying in the steam tunnels, thought of her father's silent grave, thought of all the people who'd been erased because they'd learned inconvenient truths. And she held on to one certainty. 40 minutes was enough time for the truth to become unstoppable, and Victor Hale's carefully constructed empire was about to come crashing down around his perfectly styled hair. The zip ties cut into Sarah's wrists as Hale's men shoved her into the back of a black SUV. Through the tinted windows, she could see tactical teams breaching the library, their movements precise and coordinated. 40 minutes had become 30, maybe 25 if Elena couldn't establish a secure connection fast enough. Every second mattered, and Sarah had just gambled everything on the hope that a journalist she'd met 5 minutes ago could outmaneuver a man who'd been erasing evidence for 3 decades. Hale slid into the seat beside her, his earlier rage replaced by calculated coldness. "Where's the real drive?" "Storm drain," Sarah said through split lips. "You saw me throw it." "I saw you throw a decoy." "Standard misdirection. Throw something worthless to buy time while the real objective moves elsewhere." He studied her face with clinical detachment. You're not trained for this. No operational experience, but you're smart enough to recognize leverage when you have it. So I'll ask once more, and I'll be very clear about consequences. Where is the drive? Sarah met his eyes and said nothing. She'd learned from her father that silence could be its own form of resistance, that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was refuse to give your enemy what they wanted. Hale watched her for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. Status on the journalist? He asked whoever answered. Sarah's stomach dropped as she heard the response crackle through. Target secured. Computer destroyed. No active uploads detected. Hale smiled. 30 minutes wasn't enough, Nurse Chen. My people are very good at their jobs. He leaned back, utterly relaxed. Now you have a choice. You can tell me where Elliot hid the backup drive, or I can have my team start with your friend, the security guard. He's bleeding out in the library right now. Took 2 rounds in the chest during the breach. With immediate medical attention, he might survive. Without it, he's got maybe 20 minutes before catastrophic blood loss shuts down his organs. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Martinez had been right behind her when she'd climbed out that window, had stayed to cover Elena, to buy her the time Sarah had promised, and now he was dying because of a decision Sarah had made. You're lying, she said, but her voice shook. Hale held up his phone, showing her a photo. Martinez on the floor, blood pooling beneath him, his face pale and slack. Tactical team doesn't miss center mass. Your friend is dead in 20 minutes unless you cooperate. Choose. Sarah's mind raced. Elena had said 3 files uploaded before the connection died. 3 files out of thousands. Not enough to prove anything, barely enough to raise questions. The full drive was still in her pocket. The real one, the decoy she'd thrown, had been empty. But if she gave it up now, Elliot's death meant nothing. Martinez's sacrifice meant nothing. Everything collapsed back into the silence and the lies and the unmarked graves. Let me see him, Sarah said. Let me treat him. Then we talk. You're not in a position to negotiate. Then you're not in a position to get what you want. Sarah straightened despite the pain, despite the fear. I'm a nurse. You want information from me, fine, but I'm not going to sit here and let a man bleed out when I can help him. That's not negotiable. Hale studied her, and something in his expression shifted. Not respect exactly, but recognition. Like he was seeing her clearly for the first time, reassessing his initial evaluation. You're more like Elliot than I thought. Same stubborn stupidity disguised as principle. He gestured to the driver. Take us back to the library. Let our idealistic nurse play hero for a few more minutes. The SUV pulled up to the library's service entrance. Hale's tactical team had established a perimeter, keeping curious civilians back with a combination of official-looking credentials and weapons that discouraged questions. Sarah was pulled from the vehicle and marched inside past the shocked librarian being questioned by men in suits, upstairs now marked with boot prints and shell casings. Martinez was exactly where the photo had shown him, sprawled on the blood-soaked carpet of Elena's office, breathing in shallow gasps that bubbled with fluid. Pneumothorax, Sarah's training told her immediately. At least one bullet had punctured a lung, possibly both. Without a chest tube and proper ventilation, he'd drown in his own blood. Medical kit, Sarah demanded, dropping to her knees beside him. Now! One of Hale's men tossed her a tactical first aid kit. She tore it open, found what she needed, occlusive dressing, chest seal, basic surgical supplies. Not enough for proper treatment, but enough to stabilize if she worked fast. Martinez, can you hear me? Sarah's hands were already moving, cutting away his uniform shirt to expose the entry wounds. 2 shots, both right side, one through the upper chest near the clavicle, one lower near the 5th rib. The upper wound was sucking air. She could hear the whistle of each breath. I need you to stay with me. Focus on my voice. Martinez's eyes opened, unfocused but aware. Sarah. Elena. Don't talk. Save your strength. Sarah applied the chest seal over the sucking wound, watched Martinez's breathing ease fractionally. The lower wound wasn't pneumothorax, but it was bleeding heavily. She packed it with gauze, applied pressure. You're going to be okay. I'm going to make sure you're okay. Touching, Hale said from somewhere behind her. But your friend's survival depends on your cooperation. The drive, Nurse Chen. Last chance. Sarah's hands didn't stop working. She started an IV line, got fluids running, administered morphine for the pain. Martinez's vitals were stabilizing, not good, but no longer actively dying. She'd bought him time, maybe an hour, maybe two if his body was strong enough. I don't have the drive, Sarah said, the lie coming easier than she'd expected. Elliot never gave it to me. He said something about insurance, about multiple copies, hidden in multiple locations. I was just the distraction. Hale moved closer, his shadow falling across Martinez's body. You're lying. Elliot didn't have time for elaborate contingencies. He was bleeding out in a steam tunnel with federal agents closing in. He had one drive, one chance, and he gave it to you. Then search me. Search the library. Search the whole damn city. Sarah met his eyes. You'll find empty USB drives, decoys, misdirection. Elliot was paranoid and thorough. He told me that himself. You think he'd put everything on one device and hope for the best? For the first time, Sarah saw uncertainty flicker across Hale's face. He gestured to one of his team members. Search her, thoroughly. Rough hands pulled Sarah to her feet, patted her down with professional efficiency. They found the USB drive in her pocket immediately, and Sarah's heart stopped as Hale took it, held it up to the light. Well, he said softly, what do we have here? Sarah forced herself to stay calm, to not react. The drive in his hand was the real one. She'd bet everything on the possibility that he wouldn't verify its contents immediately, wouldn't risk plugging an unknown device into any connected system in case it contained malware or tracking software. She'd bet on his paranoia being stronger than his certainty. Hale dropped the drive on the floor and crushed it under his heel, grinding plastic and circuitry into the carpet. Insurance policy destroyed. Now let's discuss what happens to people who waste my time. Sarah's relief was so intense she nearly laughed. He'd destroyed the real drive without checking it, convinced it was another decoy. Which meant the actual drive, the one Elena had pulled from her desk drawer and given Sarah in those final seconds before the breach, was still safe, still hidden, still in Elena Rodriguez's bra, if Sarah had read the journalist's quick thinking correctly. Where is she? Sarah asked, trying to sound defeated. The journalist. Elena. Secure location, being questioned about her sources and her uploads. Hale crouched beside Sarah, his voice dropping to something almost conversational. You seem like an intelligent woman, so let me explain your situation. You have no evidence. Your patient is dead in the tunnels. Your security guard is dying on this floor. The journalist will face charges of espionage and terrorism. We have very creative lawyers. And you? You're an accessory to theft of classified materials, interference with a federal operation, and about 6 other charges that carry life sentences. Or, Sarah asked, because there was always an or with men like Hale. Or you sign a non-disclosure agreement, accept a generous settlement for your pain and suffering, and go back to your quiet life as a nurse. You forget this night ever happened. You forget Elliot Cross existed. You live free and comfortable, and nobody else has to die. Sarah looked down at Martinez, still unconscious but breathing steadier now. Looked around the destroyed office, at the tactical team members watching with dead eyes, at the evidence of violence that would be sanitized and explained away and forgotten by morning. She thought about Elena, somewhere in custody, probably being offered a similar deal or facing worse threats. Thought about Elliot in those steam tunnels, choosing to die rather than let the truth stay buried. How many? She asked quietly. Hale frowned. How many what? How many people have you made this offer to? How many witnesses have you bought or buried? How many times have you stood in a room like this and convinced people that silence was survival? Sarah's voice was steady, almost curious. Does it ever bother you? Do you ever wonder what would happen if just once someone said no? People say no, Hale said. Then they disappear. That's how the world actually works, Nurse Chen. The naive idealists die early, and the smart survivors make accommodations with reality. Which one are you? Before Sarah could answer, one of Hale's team members approached, holding a tablet. Sir, we have a problem. Hale took the device, and Sarah watched his expression change as he read whatever was on the screen. The blood drained from his face, his jaw clenched, and when he looked back at Sarah, there was murder in his eyes. Phoenix Chronicle just published an article, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Allegations of illegal military operations, assassination of American civilians, government cover-up spanning 3 decades. They're citing anonymous sources and leaked documents. He thrust the tablet toward Sarah. You want to explain how that's possible when I have your journalist in custody and I just destroyed your drive? Sarah let herself smile. You have Elena Rodriguez in custody. You don't have her phone, you don't have her backup systems, and you definitely don't have her network of colleagues who've been waiting for this story for years. It was a guess, but a good one based on the red string conspiracy board she'd seen in the office. She uploaded what she could before you breached. Then she sent out alerts to every journalist she trusted. By now it's spreading everywhere. Hale backhanded her, the blow hard enough to split her already injured lip further. Those 3 files contain nothing actionable. Fragments, speculation. Nothing that proves anything, Sarah agreed, spitting blood. But enough to raise questions. Enough to make other journalists start digging. Enough to make your contained situation very public, very fast. She wiped her mouth. You're about to be famous, Mr. Hale. Exactly the opposite of what men like you need. The tablet in Hale's hand buzzed with an incoming call. He answered it, listened, and his face went from pale to ashen. When? A pause. How many outlets? Another pause, longer. I understand. No, I can. Yes, sir. Understood. He ended the call and stood motionless for a moment, and Sarah could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes. Then he gestured to his team. Kill them both. Make it look like a murder-suicide. Security guard went crazy, shot the nurse, then himself. Clean it up. The tactical team members moved with the same professional efficiency they'd shown all night, raising their weapons. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking this was a stupid way to die. But at least it meant something. At least Elliot's truth would... The explosion shook the building. Not close, but close enough. Somewhere in the library's basement level, the concussive force rattling windows and setting off car alarms outside. Hale's team scattered, weapons trained on doorways and stairwells, and in the chaos, Sarah heard something that made her heart stop. Gunfire. Close and getting closer. But not the controlled bursts of tactical teams. This was wild, desperate, the sound of someone fighting against impossible odds. North stairwell compromised, one of Hale's men shouted. Multiple hostiles incoming. That's impossible, Hale snapped. We have the building locked down. Who the hell is... Marcus Webb burst through the doorway. The doctor looked nothing like the polished professional who'd ordered Sarah out of Elliot's room hours ago. His shirt was torn and bloody, his face blackened with smoke, and he was carrying a shotgun that looked like it had been pulled from a security office. Behind him came a group of people Sarah recognized from the hospital. Nurses, orderlies, even a few patients in wheelchairs and hospital gowns, all armed with whatever they'd been able to grab. Get away from my nurse, Webb said, and his voice carried an authority Sarah had never heard from him before. And somebody get me a goddamn medical kit because I've got wounded and I'm not losing anyone else tonight. Hale's team swung their weapons toward this new threat, but they hesitated. Civilians, hospital staff, people who on paper had nothing to do with this operation. Killing tactical targets was one thing. Massacring nurses and patients was another level of exposure entirely. Webb used that hesitation, firing the shotgun low to force Hale's men into cover, and in the chaos that followed, Sarah grabbed Martinez and started dragging him toward the dubious safety of an overturned desk. The hospital staff poured into the room, some of them dropping to help wounded, others forming a human barrier between Hale's team and their targets. What the hell are you doing here, Sarah? Sarah shouted at Webb over the noise. Webb dropped beside her, already assessing Martinez's injuries with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd treated battlefield wounds. Being less of a coward than I was 30 years ago? He looked up at her, and his eyes were haunted. Elliot sent me a message before he died. Said if I wanted to stop running from what happened in those mountains, I could start by protecting the people trying to expose it. So I called in every favor, woke up every person at the hospital who gave a damn, and here we are. You're going to get them all killed. They volunteered, Webb interrupted. Told them exactly what they'd be facing. Half the staff has military backgrounds anyway. Nurses who served in Iraq, medics from Afghanistan, people who understand what it means when the government decides you're expendable. He started a fresh IV line for Martinez. his hands steady despite the bullets punching through walls. Besides, Hale can't kill all of us. Too messy, too public. He's already losing control of the narrative. As if to prove Webb's point, sirens erupted outside, multiple agencies converging, their lights painting the library windows in red and blue. Sarah heard helicopters overhead, their searchlights cutting through darkness, and realized that Elena's article had done more than raise questions. It had triggered response. "Federal agents, stand down!" a voice boomed through a megaphone. "This is FBI. We have warrants for Victor Hale and members of his security team. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force." Hale's face twisted with rage and disbelief. "FBI, those are my people. You own the people who could be bought," Webb said, and there was grim satisfaction in his voice. "But you couldn't buy everyone. Elena Rodriguez's editor has friends in the Bureau who've been investigating defense contractor corruption for years. They were just waiting for evidence." He gestured at the chaos around them. "Congratulations. You just provided it." The tactical team was already retreating, abandoning Hale with the self-preservation instinct of hired guns who knew when a contract had gone bad. They moved toward the exits with weapons lowered, hands visible, trying to blend into chaos and escape before the real authorities arrived. Hale stood alone in the center of the destroyed office, isolated and suddenly powerless. Sarah watched him process this reversal, saw the moment he recognized that everything he'd built over 30 years was collapsing in real time. His hand moved toward his jacket. A weapon, Sarah realized, and she opened her mouth to shout a warning. Webb was faster. The shotgun swung up, trained on Hale with rock-steady aim. "Don't. For once in your miserable life, don't make me add another death to my conscience." Hale's hand froze. "You don't have the spine, Marcus. You never did. That's why you ran. That's why you built your comfortable civilian life and pretended the mountains never happened." "You're right," Webb said. "I ran. I was a coward. I let good men die because I was too scared to stand up to you." His finger tightened on the trigger. "But Sarah here, she's not a coward. She risked everything for a man she didn't know, for a truth she had no stake in. She shamed me into remembering what I used to believe in. So no, I don't have the spine. I have something better. I have someone worth being brave for." FBI agents poured through the doorway, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Hale raised his hand slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury, and Sarah felt something in her chest unclench as federal handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "Victor Hale, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and violations of the Espionage Act," the lead agent announced. "You have the right to remain silent." "I want my lawyer," Hale interrupted. "And I want it on record that these people assaulted federal contractors in performance of their duties. I want charges filed against—" "Save it for the judge," the agent said, already pulling Hale toward the door. "We've got 18 months of intercepted communications and financial records that say you've been running an illegal assassination program since 1994. Your lawyer's going to earn every penny of his retainer." As they led Hale away, he looked back at Sarah one last time. "This isn't over. You think one article changes anything? I have friends in Congress, friends in the Pentagon, friends you can't even imagine. I'll be out by morning, and you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." Sarah met his eyes and felt no fear, only exhaustion and a grim satisfaction. "Maybe. But at least people will know what you did. At least Elliot's men won't be forgotten anymore. That's worth looking over my shoulder for." Hale was dragged out, still threatening, still promising retribution, and Sarah turned her attention to Martinez. The paramedics were arriving now, real ones, civilian ambulances, and she briefed them on his condition with the rapid-fire precision of professional handoff. Pneumothorax stabilized, blood loss controlled, vitals holding, but requiring immediate surgical intervention. Webb worked beside her, their movements synchronized despite years of not speaking the same language. "He'll make it," Webb said quietly. "Good work keeping him alive this long." "Where's Elena?" Sarah asked. "If Hale had her in custody—" "Over here," a familiar voice called weakly. Sarah turned to see the journalist being helped through the doorway by two nurses. Elena was bruised and bloodied but conscious, and clutched in her hand was a USB drive that looked suspiciously like the one she'd given Sarah earlier. "You had it the whole time," Sarah said. "Sports bra," Elena confirmed with a pained smile. They searched me, patted me down, but they were too professional to be thorough in certain areas. Male tactical teams have predictable blind spots. She held up the drive. I managed to upload 6 more files before they cut my connection completely. Then I sent encrypted emails to 47 journalists worldwide with access instructions. By now it's spreading faster than they can contain. As if on cue, Elena's phone started buzzing, and buzzing, and buzzing. Notifications flooding in from news outlets, social media, official statements being demanded and denied. The story was going viral in real time, the truth Elliot had died for becoming impossible to suppress. Sarah felt tears on her face and didn't bother wiping them away. He did it. Elliot actually did it. You did it, Webb corrected. Elliot started it, but you finished it. You and Elena and Martinez and everyone who refused to let this stay buried. He looked down at his hands still stained with blood. I should have done this 30 years ago. Should have spoken up when it mattered. But I was too scared of losing everything I'd built. You're speaking up now, Sarah said. That counts. Does it? Webb's voice was hollow. I still get to go home. Still get to keep my career, my reputation. While Elliot's dead in a steam tunnel and 30 other men are in unmarked graves because I stayed silent. Before Sarah could respond, FBI agents approached with notebooks and recording devices. We need statements from everyone. This is going to be a long night. It was. Hours of questions, repeated from different angles, everything documented and verified. Sarah told them about Elliot's condition, about recognizing his combat training, about the USB drive and the chase through the hospital. She told them about Victor Hale's threats, about the choice she'd made to throw a decoy drive and trust a journalist she'd just met. Somewhere around hour 3, an agent pulled her aside. The body in the steam tunnel. The hospital reports an explosion that collapsed a section, and when they sent crews down to investigate, they found remains. Male, elderly, severe injuries consistent with both gunshot wounds and blast trauma. The agent consulted his notes. ID found on the body. Military dog tags. Elliot James Cross. Service number classified. Unit designation classified. He's really dead, Sarah said, and it wasn't a question. Ma'am, with all respect, he's been dead for 30 years according to official records. This just makes it true. The agent's expression softened. But we'll make sure he gets a proper burial this time. Arlington, full military honors, the works. It'll take time to cut through the bureaucracy, but we'll make it happen. Dawn was breaking when they finally released Sarah. She walked out of the library into a media circus, cameras, reporters, satellite trucks broadcasting live feeds. Someone had leaked her name and suddenly, microphones were being thrust in her face. Questions shouted over each other. How did you know Elliot Cross? Did you see Victor Hale commit crimes? Is it true you stole classified documents? Sarah pushed through without answering, exhaustion making everything feel distant and unreal. A hospital administrator was waiting by a town car, looking uncomfortable. Nurse Chen, I've been authorized to offer you administrative leave, paid, naturally. Given the trauma you've experienced, I'm fine, Sarah said automatically. You're not fine. You've been shot at, assaulted, and caught up in a federal investigation. Take the time. We'll hold your position. Sarah looked back at the library, at the scene of everything that had happened. Martinez was already in surgery at a different hospital, prognosis good. Webb was giving his own statement, finally unburdening himself of secrets he'd carried for decades. Elena was being interviewed live on national television, her black eye and split lip giving visual weight to her words as she detailed government corruption and murder. And Elliot was dead, officially this time, his last mission finally complete. When can I visit Martinez? Sarah asked. He's at St. Joseph's. Surgery will take another few hours, but then that's where I'm going. Sarah started walking, her legs protesting every step but carrying her forward anyway. I need to make sure he's okay. Need to... She stopped because she didn't know how to finish that sentence. Need to make sure his sacrifice wasn't wasted. Need to see proof that someone survived this nightmare. Need to not be alone with the weight of everything that had happened. The administrator followed. I'll drive you. It's the least I can do. They drove through Phoenix as the city woke up, news reports already dominating every station. Sarah watched the story unfold in real time, government officials scrambling to respond, Defense contractors issuing careful denials, former Shadow Company family members coming forward with decades of unanswered questions. The dam had broken, and now the flood was unstoppable. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Thank you. Your father would be proud. Marcus." Sarah stared at the message, at Webb's unexpected acknowledgement that he'd known her father, that they'd shared the same silence and the same guilt. She wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at him for never speaking up, for letting her father die with his stories untold. But anger took energy she didn't have left. And besides, he was finally trying to make it right. That had to count for something. St. Joseph's Hospital felt surreal after everything. Normal, sterile, safe. Sarah checked in at the surgical wing and was told Martinez was still in the OR, but stable. She sat in the waiting room, surrounded by other people waiting for news about their loved ones, and felt the adrenaline finally drain away. A nurse, not one Sarah recognized, brought her coffee and a sandwich. "You should eat. You look like you're about to fall over." Sarah tried to remember the last time she'd eaten, and came up blank. "What time is it?" "Almost 7. Morning shift's coming in." The nurse hesitated. "Is it true what they're saying on the news? That you helped expose some kind of government conspiracy?" "I helped a dying man tell the truth," Sarah said. "The conspiracy part was already there. I just made sure people couldn't ignore it anymore." The nurse nodded slowly. "My brother served in Iraq. Came back different. Never talked about what he saw, what he did. Killed himself 3 years ago." She met Sarah's eyes. "If what you did helps people understand what we ask soldiers to carry, what we ask them to bury, that matters. Just wanted you to know." She left before Sarah could respond, and Sarah sat there holding cold coffee and thinking about all the people who carried weight they couldn't share, all the secrets that festered in silence until they destroyed the people keeping them. An hour later, a surgeon emerged. "Family of Officer Martinez?" Sarah stood. "I'm his... We work together. Is he okay?" 2 punctured ribs, collapsed lung, significant blood loss. But he's young and strong, and someone did excellent field stabilization work. The surgeon smiled. "He's asking for someone named Sarah. Says he needs to know if it was worth it." Sarah followed the surgeon to recovery, where Martinez lay connected to monitors and oxygen, his chest wrapped in bandages. His eyes opened when she entered, and the relief on his face was almost painful to see. "We did it," he said, voice rough from intubation. "Right? Tell me we actually did it." Sarah took his hand. "Victor Hale is in federal custody facing 37 counts and counting. Elena's story is on every major outlet. The FBI is opening investigations into Shadow Company and a dozen other classified operations. Congressional hearings are already being scheduled." She squeezed his fingers gently. "Yeah, we did it." Martinez closed his eyes, and Sarah saw tears leak from the corners. "Elliot? Died in the steam tunnels. Took out enough of Hale's team to buy us the time we needed." Sarah's voice caught. "He's being buried at Arlington with full honors. His unit's being officially recognized. No more unmarked graves." "Good," Martinez whispered. "That's good." He looked at her again, expression serious despite the pain medication making him drowsy. "What you did tonight, climbing out that window, facing down Hale, trusting people you barely knew, that took guts I don't think I have." "You threw yourself into a firefight to protect a journalist and bought her time to upload files," Sarah countered. "You've got plenty of guts. You've just been using them to protect people instead of yourself." "Yeah, well," Martinez's smile was weak but genuine. "Guess we make a good team, assuming we still have jobs after this." "Administrative leave," Sarah said. "Paid. Apparently nearly dying in the line of duty earns you some recovery time." Silver linings. His eyes were drifting closed. "Hey, Sarah, when I get out of here, remind me to never doubt your instincts again. You said that old man wasn't crazy, and you were right about everything." Sarah stayed until he fell asleep, then made her way to the hospital exit. Outside, the morning sun was bright and harsh, and she realized she was still wearing blood-stained scrubs from the night before. She needed a shower, needed sleep, needed to process everything that had happened before it overwhelmed her completely. But first, she needed to see one more person. The Central Library was still a crime scene, Yellow tape and federal agents documenting everything. But Elena Rodriguez was outside, being interviewed by yet another news crew, and when she saw Sarah, she excused herself and walked over. "You look terrible," Elena said. "You look worse," Sarah replied, taking in the journalist's black eye and split lip. They stood there for a moment, two women who'd met in chaos and survived through trust. Elena pulled out a notebook, clicked her pen. "I'm writing a follow-up piece. Detailed account of last night, first-hand testimony. I'd like to interview you properly. Not now," she added quickly. "When you're ready, but your story deserves to be told." "It's not my story," Sarah said. "It's Elliott's. It's Shadow Company's." "It's both," Elena corrected. "And it matters that a nurse, someone with no training, no experience in this world, saw what was happening and chose to act. It matters that ordinary people stood up against extraordinary corruption." She lowered her pen. "People need heroes who look like them, who are scared and uncertain but do the right thing anyway. That's you." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist she wasn't a hero, just someone who'd made a series of desperate decisions and gotten lucky. But she saw the determination in Elena's eyes and recognized it, the same drive that had made the journalist risk her life for truth, the same conviction that some stories needed to be told regardless of cost. "When I'm ready," Sarah agreed. "But Elena, make sure people know about Webb, too, about how he finally found the courage to speak up. People deserve second chances, especially when they use them right." Elena nodded, made a note. "One more thing. Hale's lawyers are already filing motions, calling for evidence suppression, claiming federal overreach. This is going to be a long fight. Months, maybe years of legal battles. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah thought about Elliot dying in the dark, thought about her father's silent grave, thought about Martinez bleeding on a library floor and Webb finally stepping out of the shadows, and 32 operators who'd been erased because they'd learned too much. "I'll be there," she said. "Every hearing, every trial, every moment they try to bury this again. I'll be there to make sure someone remembers what it cost." She left Elena to her interviews and started walking, no destination in mind, just needing movement. Her phone rang. Her mother, probably watching the news, probably terrified. Sarah answered. "I'm okay, Mom. I'm safe. I'll explain everything when I get home." "Your father," her mother said, voice thick with tears. "He knew men like Elliot, served with them. He never told me details, but I knew. I always knew he was carrying something too heavy to share." "He was," Sarah confirmed, "but maybe now some of that weight can be distributed. Maybe the families who've been lied to for decades can finally have answers." She talked to her mother for 20 minutes, walking through Phoenix's waking streets, watching the city come alive, oblivious to the battle that had been fought in its underbelly. By the time she ended the call, Sarah found herself at Mercy Hill General, the hospital where this had all started just 12 hours ago. The building looked normal, peaceful, like nothing had happened. But Sarah knew better, knew that somewhere in these halls decisions had been made that changed everything. Room 347, where Elliot had fought his invisible war. The corridors where he'd been restrained and sedated. The service elevator that had carried them into darkness. She went inside, took the elevator to the 3rd floor. Room 347's door was open, the bed stripped and ready for the next patient. No evidence remained of the violence, the fear, the moment when an old soldier had recognized someone who might understand. Sarah stood in the doorway for a long moment, then turned and walked away. She had given her statement, had done her part, had helped expose a truth that powerful people had killed to keep buried. Now came the hard part, living with what she knew, carrying the weight of what she'd witnessed, and somehow finding a way to return to normal when normal had been irrevocably changed. But as she left the hospital and stepped into sunlight, Sarah Chen realized that maybe normal wasn't the goal anymore. Maybe the goal was making sure that the next time someone saw injustice, the next time someone recognized that something was deeply wrong, they'd remember that one nurse had refused to look away. And maybe that would be enough to make them do the same. Her phone buzzed one more time. Another unknown number, this one with a video file attached. The message read, "You should see this." Marcus Sarah opened the video and felt her breath catch. It was helmet camera footage, grainy and old, showing mountains she didn't recognize and men in combat gear she couldn't identify. Elliot's voice, Decades younger but unmistakable, calling coordinates and issuing commands. The video cut to a different scene, an argument. Elliot facing down a man in a clean suit who could only be Victor Hale. Their words inaudible, but their body language screaming conflict. Then the video jumped to aftermath. Bodies. American bodies. Soldiers dead in positions that suggested they'd been shot by their own side. And Hale standing over them, speaking into a radio, his expression calm and professional as he reported a training accident. Marcus had saved this. Had carried this evidence for 30 years, too afraid to use it, but unable to destroy it. And now he was sharing it, adding one more piece to the mountain of proof that would bury Victor Hale and everyone who'd helped him. Sarah forwarded the video to Elena with a simple message: more evidence. Use it. Then she put her phone away and started the long walk home, carrying the knowledge that some battles never truly ended, but at least now they were being fought in the light where everyone could see them. The war wasn't over. But for the first time in 3 decades, the people who'd started it were finally being held accountable. And somewhere in a collapsed steam tunnel, in a makeshift grave that would soon be relocated to Arlington National Cemetery, Elliot James Cross could finally rest knowing his final mission was complete. Sarah's apartment was exactly as she'd left it 24 hours ago. Dishes in the sink, scrubs draped over a chair, the mundane debris of a life that no longer existed. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, feeling the disconnect between the woman who'd left for a routine night shift and the one who'd returned having helped dismantle a government conspiracy. The gap between those two versions of herself felt unbridgeable. She showered until the water ran cold, watching blood and cordite and the residue of violence circle the drain, changed into clean clothes that felt strange against skin that had spent hours in fear and adrenaline. Made coffee she didn't drink and stood at her kitchen window watching Phoenix wake up to a news cycle that would dominate for weeks. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Voicemails from reporters, text messages from colleagues, emails from strangers who'd somehow gotten her contact information. She ignored them all except one, a calendar notification from the FBI requesting her presence at a federal building downtown at 2 p.m. for what they called additional testimony regarding ongoing investigations. It was 9 in the morning. She had 5 hours to figure out how to function like a normal person again. The knock at her door made her jump, hand instinctively reaching for a weapon she didn't have. Through the peephole, she saw Marcus Webb, looking as exhausted as she felt, holding 2 cups of coffee from the overpriced place down the street. "Peace offering," he said when she opened the door, "and a conversation if you're willing." Sarah let him in because she was too tired to be angry, and because some part of her recognized that Webb was fighting his own battle with the past. He sat at her small kitchen table, pushed 1 coffee toward her, and for a moment they just existed in the quiet. "I gave the FBI everything," Webb said finally. "Medical records I kept from our unit physicals, personal journals documenting missions that officially never happened, names of other personnel who were involved in the cover-up." He stared into his coffee. 30 years of evidence I was too scared to use. I documented everything because I thought someday I'd find the courage. Never did. Until Elliot forced my hand. "He had a way of doing that," Sarah said. "He called me 2 days ago. I didn't recognize the number, almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up, and there he was, voice I hadn't heard in 3 decades, asking if I remembered my oath." Webb's hands shook slightly around the cup. "He said he was coming to Phoenix to steal evidence that would expose Hale. Said he probably wouldn't survive it, asked if I'd at least try to protect whoever he gave the evidence to. I told him I couldn't. Told him I had a career, a reputation, a life I'd built." "What did he say to that?" "He said, 'I had a life too, Marcus.' We all did. Hale took that from us in those mountains, and we let him because we were too broken to fight back. But I'm fighting now. You can help or you can hide, but you don't get to pretend you didn't know." Webb looked up, and his eyes were red. Then he hung up. Didn't call again. "When you brought him into the ER, when I saw his face, I knew this was the moment I'd been running from for 30 years. Sarah sipped her coffee, let the silence stretch. Finally, she asked, "What happened in those mountains?" Webb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started talking, and the words came like a dam breaking. "We were sent to eliminate a terrorist cell. That's what the briefing said. High-value targets operating in the Hindu Kush, planning attacks on American interests. Hale gave us coordinates, gave us intelligence that seemed solid. We infiltrated, established position, waited for the green light. His voice dropped. When we breached the compound, we found journalists, aid workers, people documenting human rights violations by a warlord who happened to be on the CIA payroll. They had evidence, photos, videos, testimony from locals, evidence that would have exposed American support for someone committing atrocities. Sarah felt ice in her stomach. You were sent to kill them. We were sent to eliminate a problem. Hale didn't care that they were civilians, didn't care that some of them were American citizens. They threatened an asset, so they had to go. Webb's hands clenched. Half our unit refused the order, said we weren't assassins, weren't going to murder civilians no matter what the briefing claimed. Elliot was one of them. So was I. We stood down, said we'd report this up the chain of command. And Hale? Hale had contingencies, had a second team positioned nearby, contractors, mercenaries, people with no moral qualms about the work. They hit us while we were arguing among ourselves, caught us in a crossfire, made it look like the terrorists had ambushed us. Webb's voice broke. 32 operators went into those mountains. The ones who refused orders died in the initial assault. The ones who complied died in the cleanup. Hale needed everyone gone. Witnesses, evidence, the whole operation erased. Only Elliot and I survived, and only because Elliot was paranoid enough to have an escape route planned. How did you get out? Elliot dragged me through a river, through terrain that should have killed us, bleeding and half dead for 3 days until we reached a village. Local doctor patched us up enough to travel. We made it to an embassy, tried to report what happened. Webb laughed bitterly. They called us delusional, said we'd been in the field too long, suffered trauma-induced psychosis. Shadow Company never existed. The mission never happened. Our teammates were killed in separate training accidents over the course of 6 months. Clean, efficient, completely deniable. Sarah absorbed this, fitting pieces together. Elliot kept fighting. You didn't. Elliot had nothing to lose. No family who'd be threatened, no career to protect. I had a wife, 2 kids. Hale made it very clear what would happen if I spoke up. My family would have accidents, my reputation would be destroyed, and I'd spend the rest of my life in psychiatric detention for making false accusations against decorated intelligence officers. Webb met her eyes. So I made a deal. I'd stay silent, disappear into civilian life, and my family would be safe. I became a doctor because I thought saving lives would somehow balance the scales. Stupid, right? Not stupid, Sarah said. Human. Elliot called it cowardice, said I was hiding behind morality while good people stayed buried. Webb stood, paced her small kitchen. And he was right. I spent 30 years treating patients, building a reputation, pretending I was doing good work, all while knowing that Hale was still out there, still running operations, still erasing people who got in his way. I let it happen because I was too scared to be the one who stood up. Sarah's FBI notification buzzed again, a reminder with an address attached. She glanced at it, then back at Webb. You stood up last night. That counts. Does it? Elliot's dead. Martinez nearly died. You put yourself in the crosshairs of people who've been killing with impunity for decades. Webb's expression was anguished. I should have done this 30 years ago. Should have gone public. Damn the consequences. If I had, maybe those journalists would have lived. Maybe Elliot wouldn't have spent 3 decades running from shadows. And maybe Hale would have had you killed and buried this even deeper, Sarah countered. You can't know how it would have played out. All you can do is make the right choice now. Webb pulled an envelope from his jacket, set it on her table. That's a full deposition. Everything I know about Shadow Company, about Hale's network, about other operations that use the same playbook. Names, dates, locations, evidence that corroborates what's on Elliot's drive. He pushed it toward her. The FBI is going to want this. So are about a dozen other agencies, but I wanted you to have it first. Wanted you to know that this time, I'm not running. Sarah took the envelope, felt its weight. They're going to destroy you. Your career, your reputation, everything you built will be gone. It was built on silence, Webb said, on complicity. Maybe it deserves to be gone. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Elliot talked about you in those last minutes before he went into the tunnels. Said you reminded him why he kept fighting. Said you saw him as a soldier instead of a problem, and that made all the difference. After Webb left, Sarah sat alone with the envelope and the weight of what came next. She knew what the FBI wanted: her testimony to build their case, to create an airtight prosecution that would put Hale away forever. But she also knew that testimony would make her a target, would paint a permanent mark on her back for anyone loyal to Hale's network who wanted revenge. Her phone rang. Elena Rodriguez calling from a number Sarah now had saved. "Turn on the news," Elena said without preamble. "Any channel. It's happening." Sarah found her remote, clicked on the TV. Every major network was running the same story: split screens showing Hale in handcuffs being led into federal court, alongside photos of shadow company operators whose faces were finally being shown to the world. The banner headline read, "Defense contractor charged in decades-long conspiracy to murder civilians." "Pentagon just released a statement," Elena continued, her voice tight with excitement. "They're opening a full investigation into black operations dating back to 1987. They're promising transparency, accountability, full disclosure of previously classified missions. This is unprecedented, Sarah. This never happens." "What about Hale's lawyers?" Sarah asked, watching the screen as legal analysts debated the charges. "Filing every motion they can think of, claiming evidence was obtained illegally, that Hale has diplomatic immunity, that the whole thing is politically motivated persecution. But the judge denied bail, called him a flight risk with access to unlimited resources and foreign contacts. He's staying locked up pending trial." On screen, Hale was being led into the courthouse. Even in handcuffs, even surrounded by federal marshals, he moved with that same arrogant confidence. He looked directly at the camera, and Sarah could have sworn he was looking at her specifically, promising retribution with his eyes alone. "Sarah, you still there?" Elena's voice pulled her back. "I'm here." "Good, because I need to warn you about something. Hale's defense team is already trying to discredit witnesses. They're digging into backgrounds, looking for anything they can use to undermine testimony. Your nursing record, your personal life, anything that could make you look unstable or unreliable." "Let them dig," Sarah said. "I've got nothing to hide." "Everyone's got something," Elena replied gently, "and these people are very good at finding it and twisting it into weapons. Just be prepared for them to make this ugly." Sarah thought about her father's service record, about the gaps in classified sections she'd never been able to access. Thought about her own disciplinary record, minor infractions, nothing serious, but enough to construct a narrative if someone was motivated. How ugly are we talking? There are already floating stories about you being a disgruntled employee with a grudge against hospital administration, about Martinez having financial troubles and possibly being bribed, about Webb suffering from PTSD and fabricating evidence to settle old scores. Elena paused. "It's all bullshit, but it's bullshit that plays well with juries who want to believe the government wouldn't do something this monstrous. So what do? We document everything, every threat, every attempt at intimidation, every dirty trick they try. We stay ahead of their narrative and control our own story." Elena's voice hardened. "And we make sure that when this goes to trial, the evidence is so overwhelming that all their character assassination doesn't matter." The FBI building downtown was a monument to institutional authority, concrete and glass designed to intimidate anyone who entered. Sarah showed her ID at security, was escorted through corridors lined with photos of former directors and commendations for service, and deposited in a conference room where 3 agents waited with recording equipment and coffee that smelled like it had been made sometime last week. "Ms. Chen, thank you for coming." The lead agent, identified herself as Special Agent Victoria Morrison, gestured to a chair. "We have some follow-up questions about last night's events, and we'd like to get your perspective on a few additional matters that have come to our attention." Sarah sat, accepted the terrible coffee because refusing felt confrontational. "I'll help however I can." Morrison pulled out a file, spread photos across the table. Sarah recognized them. Hale's tactical team members, the men who'd shot Martinez and breached the library. "Can you identify any of these individuals as being present during the assault?" Sarah pointed to 5 faces, described their positions and actions in detail that came easier than she'd expected. Her nursing training had made her observant. She'd learned to catalog details quickly, to note patterns and deviations. Now she used that training to build a prosecution, identifying weapons and tactics and the chain of command she'd observed. "And Victor Hale," Morrison continued, Can you describe your interactions with him? Sarah recounted the conversation in the SUV, the threats about Martinez, the moment Hale had struck her. As she spoke, one of the other agents made notes while Morrison watched her with sharp, evaluating eyes. He told you he had people in law enforcement, Morrison said. Did he specify who? No, just said he'd been building his network for 30 years and had friends in the Bureau, in Congress, in the Pentagon. Sarah met Morrison's gaze directly. I assume you're checking your own people for connections to him. We've had an internal investigation running since before last night, Morrison confirmed. 3 agents have already been placed on administrative leave pending review of their financial records and communications. We take corruption seriously, Ms. Chen, especially when it compromises national security. Sarah wanted to believe that. Wanted to trust that the system would actually hold itself accountable. But she'd seen too much in the last 24 hours to take institutional promises at face value. Morrison seemed to read her skepticism. I understand your hesitation. You've been through an experience that would make anyone question authority. But I need you to know there are people in this building who've been trying to take down Victor Hale for years. We just never had the evidence to make it stick. What you and Elena Rodriguez brought us, what Dr. Webb has corroborated, it's the break we've been waiting for. How many years? Sarah asked. Personally, 7. My first case as a field agent involved investigating defense contractor fraud. Kept running into walls, evidence disappearing, witnesses recanting. Hale's name came up over and over, but always with enough distance that we couldn't make the connection. He's brilliant at insulation, at making sure he's never directly tied to the crimes he orders. Morrison's jaw tightened. But you got him on tape threatening you. Got him on scene at a federal crime. Got him connected to classified documents through undeniable evidence. This time, he can't slither away. The interview lasted 4 hours. They went through everything. Timeline, conversations, evidence chain, witness observations. Sarah's throat was raw from talking by the time Morrison finally called a break. One more thing, Morrison said as Sarah stood to leave. We're offering witness protection, full relocation, new identity, the works. Given Hale's resources and connections, we think you're at serious risk. I'm not running, Sarah said immediately. This isn't running. It's survival. Hale's going to be locked up, but his network isn't. We've identified at least 15 individuals with direct ties to him who are still at large. Some of them are violent. All of them are motivated to protect their interests. Sarah thought about her apartment, her job, her life. Thought about disappearing into some anonymous suburb with a new name and a manufactured past. Thought about Elliot, who'd spent 3 decades hiding and running and never getting free of the ghosts. If I disappear, Hale wins, she said. He gets to sit in his cell knowing he scared me into hiding, gets to maintain the power dynamic even from behind bars. She shook her head. I'll take precautions. I'll be smart, but I'm not letting him take my life away. Morrison didn't look happy, but she nodded. We'll assign protective surveillance. You won't see them, but they'll be there. And Ms. Chen, if anything feels off, if you notice anything suspicious, you call me immediately. Not local police, not hospital security. Me. Sarah took Morrison's card, committed the number to memory. Walking out of the federal building into afternoon sunlight felt surreal. The world continuing its normal rhythm while everything she knew had fundamentally changed. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. MW, Sarah pulled up her email, found a message from Webb with multiple attachments. The subject line read, The Others. She opened the first attachment and felt her breath catch. It was a list, names, dates of death, official causes. All the shadow company operators who'd supposedly died in separate training accidents. But Webb had included additional documentation, autopsy reports that didn't match the official stories, witness statements that contradicted the narratives, photographs of bodies that showed execution-style wounds labeled as training mishaps. The second attachment was worse. Mission logs from operations that officially never happened. Targets who were journalists, activists, whistleblowers, people who'd threatened powerful interests and been eliminated with American weapons and American training. Each mission had Hale's authorization buried in the documentation, hidden behind code names and clearance levels, but traceable for anyone who knew what to look for. The third attachment made Sarah's hands shake. It was a list of current threats, people Hale's network had identified as problems requiring resolution. Sarah's name was third from the top, annotated with her address, her work schedule, her usual routes. Elena was second. Martinez was fifth. She immediately forwarded everything to Morrison, then called Elena. "I know," Elena said before Sarah could speak. "Webb sent me the same files. I've got people at the Chronicle analyzing the mission logs, cross-referencing names with unsolved murders and disappearances. Sarah, this is bigger than we thought. Hale wasn't running one illegal operation. He was running an entire system, a machine for making inconvenient people disappear." "How many?" Sarah asked. "Best estimate based on what we can verify? At least 47 deaths over 30 years that match the pattern. Probably more we haven't connected yet." Elena's voice was tight. "I'm running the story tonight. Full exposure, all the documentation, everything Webb provided. It's going to cause a shitstorm, but people need to know. Hale's lawyers will claim it's prejudicing the jury pool. Let them claim. This is news, and news doesn't wait for convenient timing." Sarah heard typing in the background. "I'm also publishing the threat list. Every name on it needs to know their targets, needs to be able to take precautions. Elena, that's going to make you an even bigger target. I'm already a target, so are you. So is everyone who knows what Hale did. Best defense is sunlight. Make it too public for them to move against us without drawing attention." Sarah wasn't sure she believed that, but she understood the logic. "Be careful." "You too. And Sarah, thank you for trusting me with this, for not running when you had every reason to." After ending the call, Sarah went home and found her apartment had been searched. Not ransacked. The search had been professional, careful, almost invisible except for tiny details her nursing eye caught. A book slightly out of place. A drawer not quite closed the way she'd left it. Her laptop moved an inch to the left. She called Morrison immediately. "Don't touch anything," Morrison ordered. "I'm sending a forensics team." "Get out of the apartment and wait outside." Sarah grabbed her phone and keys, was halfway to the door when she saw it. An envelope on her kitchen counter, placed exactly where she'd notice it. Her name written in elegant script. She knew she shouldn't open it, knew it was probably evidence, possibly dangerous. But her hands moved anyway, tearing the envelope and extracting a single page. The message was brief. "Ms. Chen, you've made yourself quite the nuisance. Congratulations on your 15 minutes of fame. I hope you're enjoying them because they'll be the most significant moments of an otherwise unremarkable life. You should know that I have contingencies. Insurance. People who are very good at making problems disappear, even from protective custody. Your FBI friends think they can protect you, but they're bureaucrats playing at security while my associates are professionals who've been doing this work since before you were born. The offer stands? Take the settlement, sign the NDA, disappear into a comfortable anonymity, or continue this crusade and discover exactly how far my reach extends. Tick-tock, little nurse. Your time is running out. VH. The letter was unsigned, but the initials were clear enough. Sarah photographed it with her phone, sent it to Morrison, then left it on the counter for forensics. Outside, neighbors were gathering, drawn by the federal vehicles pulling up. Sarah saw their stares, their whispered conversations, and knew her anonymity in this building was gone. She was now that nurse from the news, the woman who'd helped expose a government conspiracy, and that label would follow her everywhere. Morrison arrived with her team, cordoned off the apartment. How did they get in? Building has security cameras, controlled access. Hale said his people were professionals, Sarah said. I'm guessing they're good at being invisible. We'll pull all the security footage, check for signs of entry. In the meantime, you can't stay here. We'll set you up in a safe house. No. Sarah's voice was firm. I'm not hiding. I'm not running. But I need to visit someone. Martinez was awake when Sarah arrived at St. Joseph's, propped up in bed and scrolling through news coverage on a tablet. He looked up when she entered, and his expression shifted from concentration to concern. You look worse than I do, and I got shot twice. Sarah pulled a chair close, sat. Someone broke into my apartment, left me a threatening letter from Hale. Martinez's jaw tightened. FBI on it. They're sweeping now. Morrison wants me in protective custody. You should do it. I'm not running, Sarah said, and Martinez smiled. Stubborn, I respect that. He shifted, winced at the pain. Listen, I've been thinking about what happens next. This trial, these investigations, they're going to take months, maybe years. Hale's got resources, got lawyers who'll drag this out as long as possible. Are you ready for that? For your whole life becoming about this one thing? Sarah thought about it, really thought about it. No, but I'm doing it anyway. Why? Because Elliot died for this truth. Because 32 soldiers were murdered and erased. Because my father carried secrets that destroyed him, and maybe if people like him had felt safe speaking up, things would be different. She met Martinez's eyes. Because someone has to, and it might as well be me. Martinez was quiet for a moment. Your dad served? Vietnam, Special Forces. He never talked about it, not once in my entire life. Just carried whatever he'd seen in silence until it killed him. Sarah's voice was steady despite the emotion. I spent years wishing he'd trusted me enough to share it, wishing I could have helped him carry the weight. Now I understand why he didn't. Some truths are so ugly that you spend your whole life trying to protect the people you love from knowing they exist. But you're choosing to know anyway. I'm choosing to make sure the truth doesn't stay buried. There's a difference. A nurse, different shift, someone Sarah didn't know, came in to check Martinez's vitals. She worked with quiet efficiency, made notes on her tablet, then paused at the door. Ms. Chen, I just wanted to say, what you did took guts. My husband's military, deployed 3 times, came back different each time. If exposing this corruption helps people like him, helps families understand what soldiers go through, that matters. Just wanted you to know. She left before Sarah could respond, and Martinez grinned despite the pain. See, you're inspiring people. Very heroic. Shut up, Sarah said, but she was smiling too. Her phone buzzed. Elena, sending a link. Sarah opened it and saw the Phoenix Chronicles website, lead story bannered across the top. Shadow Company, the 30-year conspiracy to murder American citizens. Below the headline were photos, Shadow Company operators, their real faces finally shown to the world. Mission logs excerpted and annotated. Webb's testimony quoted extensively. And woven throughout, Sarah's role in bringing everything to light, painted as the determined nurse who'd refused to let an old soldier's truth die with him. They made you the hero, Martinez observed, reading over her shoulder. I'm not the hero. Elliot was. Elliot was the catalyst. You were the one who made sure his death meant something. That's heroism, Sarah, whether you're comfortable with the label or not. Sarah's phone rang. Morrison's number. I'm seeing the article. This is going to accelerate everything. What do you mean? Hale's lawyers are going to demand an immediate hearing, claim this publicity makes a fair trial impossible. Judge will probably order media blackout, gag all witnesses. Morrison paused. But more importantly, this makes you an even more visible target. The safe house isn't optional anymore, Sarah. If you won't take protection, I can't guarantee your safety. Sarah looked at Martinez in his hospital bed. Thought about Elena working to expose truth despite threats. Thought about Webb finally standing up after 30 years. I'll take precautions. I'll be smart. But I'm not disappearing into hiding while Hale's network is still out there. Morrison sighed. Then I'm assigning you a protection detail. Round-the-clock surveillance, armed agents, the works. You don't leave home without escort. You don't go anywhere without notification. This is non-negotiable, Sarah. Fine. And one more thing. Arraignment hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Hale will be there. Press will be there. This is your chance to look him in the eye and show him you're not scared. I am scared, Sarah admitted. Good. Scared keeps you alert. But scared doesn't mean you back down. I'll see you at the courthouse at 9 a.m. After ending the call, Sarah sat with Martinez in comfortable silence, watching evening fall across Phoenix through the hospital window. Somewhere in this city, Victor Hale sat in a federal holding cell, probably on the phone with expensive lawyers plotting strategy. Somewhere, Elena was writing follow-up stories and coordinating with other journalists. Somewhere, Webb was giving depositions and trying to atone for 3 decades of silence. And somewhere in a collapsed steam tunnel awaiting recovery, Elliot James Cross waited to be carried to Arlington with the honor he'd been denied for 30 years. Martinez? Yeah? Thank you for having my back, for trusting me when I made crazy decisions, for being willing to die for people you barely knew. Martinez reached out, squeezed her hand gently. Thank you for giving me a reason to. For seeing more in me than just a security guard clocking hours. For making me remember that sometimes the job is about more than just collecting a paycheck. Sarah left the hospital as night fell, federal agents falling into formation around her. Protection detail Morrison had promised. She could feel their presence, discreet but omnipresent, and part of her hated needing them, while another part was grateful someone was watching her back. At home, still cordoned with crime scene tape, Sarah packed a bag with clothes and essentials. Morrison had arranged a hotel room, something secure with limited access and good sight lines. It felt excessive until Sarah remembered the threat list, remembered her name third from the top with annotations about her schedule and patterns. Tomorrow she would face Hale in court. Tomorrow the real battle would begin. Not fought with weapons or in tunnels, but in depositions and testimonies and the slow grind of justice that could take years to reach resolution. But tonight, Sarah Chen stood in her violated apartment and felt something shift inside her. Not confidence exactly, but certainty. She'd made her choice. She'd picked a side. And now she would see it through no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. Her phone buzzed one final time, a text from a number she didn't recognize. He underestimated you. They all did. That's their weakness. Use it. Shadow. Sarah stared at the message, trying to parse who could have sent it. Not Elliot. He was dead. Not Webb. He wasn't the cryptic type. Not Morrison. Too informal for FBI communication. Someone else. Someone in Hale's network, maybe. Or someone who'd been watching this unfold and had their own reasons for wanting to see him fall. She saved the number, typed a response. Who is this? No answer came. Just silence and the weight of tomorrow's confrontation hanging in the air like a promise of storms to come. The federal courthouse was a fortress dressed as architecture, concrete barriers disguised as planters, security checkpoints masked as metal detectors, and enough armed personnel to repel a small invasion. Sarah arrived at 8:30, her protection detail forming a tight perimeter as news vans and protesters crowded the plaza. Some held signs supporting her. Truth matters. Justice for Shadow Company. Others carried messages she tried not to read, accusations that she was a traitor helping enemies of the state. Morrison met her at the security entrance, guiding her through a private screening area away from the cameras. Media circus is worse than expected. Judge Chen issued a gag order last night, but it won't stop the coverage. Everyone wants a piece of this story. Judge Chen? Sarah asked. Any relation? Distant, maybe. She's tough, doesn't tolerate games from either side. Good news for us, Hale's lawyers won't be able to bury this in procedural nonsense. Morrison led Sarah through marble corridors lined with the weight of institutional justice. You ready for this? Sarah thought about the question honestly. Was she ready to face the man who'd threatened her life, who'd ordered her death, who represented a system so corrupt it had murdered civilians and erased soldiers to protect itself? No, but I'm doing it anyway. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected, intimate in a way that made everything feel more personal. Sarah was seated in the gallery behind the prosecution table, federal agents flanking her on both sides. The room filled quickly, lawyers, federal officials, journalists allowed in under strict conditions, and family members of Shadow Company operators who'd spent decades believing their loved ones died in accidents. Sarah recognized one woman from Webb's files, Margaret Cross, Elliot's younger sister, who'd been told her brother died in a training exercise in 1994 and had spent 30 years tending an empty grave. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and Sarah saw recognition flare in the older woman's face. She'd seen Sarah's photo in the news, knew this was the nurse who'd been with Elliot in his final hours. Margaret mouthed two words, "Thank you." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur. All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Chen presiding. Judge Chen entered with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd already decided she had no patience for theatrics. Mid-60s, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, she surveyed the courtroom with the air of a general inspecting troops. Be seated. We're here for the arraignment of Victor Hale on multiple federal charges. Are all parties present? The prosecution confirmed. Then the defense attorney stood, Jonathan Weiss, known for defending the indefensible and winning through sheer aggressive brilliance. Your Honor, before we proceed, the defense moves for dismissal on grounds that prejudicial media coverage has made a fair trial impossible. Judge Chen didn't even look up from her notes. Denied. This is an arraignment, Mr. Weiss, not a trial. We're here to enter a plea and set conditions for release. Save your media complaints for jury selection. Then the defense moves for immediate release on bail. Mr. Hale is a decorated veteran with extensive ties to the community. Mr. Hale is a flight risk with access to offshore accounts and foreign contacts, Judge Chen interrupted. Motion denied. He stays in custody pending trial. Your Honor, this is unprecedented treatment for a man who's served his country with distinction for 40 years. Mr. Weiss? Judge Chen's voice could have cut glass. I've read the charges. I've reviewed the evidence summary. Your client is accused of orchestrating the murders of American citizens on American soil, then covering it up through intimidation and additional murders spanning 3 decades. He stays in custody. If you'd like to appeal my decision, feel free to waste the appellate court's time. Sarah watched Weiss struggle to regroup, saw his carefully prepared arguments crumbling against Judge Chen's refusal to play along. This was what justice looked like when it worked, clear-eyed and unmoved by reputation or connections. Bring in the defendant, Judge Chen ordered. The side door opened and Victor Hale entered in an orange jumpsuit that should have diminished him, but somehow didn't. He moved with the same controlled grace Sarah remembered, his silver hair perfectly styled despite incarceration, his expression calm and almost amused. He scanned the courtroom, eyes passing over prosecutors and press, landing on Sarah with unmistakable recognition. He smiled, not threatening, just confident, like he knew something everyone else didn't. Sarah held his gaze and refused to look away. She'd faced his hired killers, survived his threats, carried evidence that would destroy him. She wasn't about to flinch now. Mr. Hale, Judge Chen said, you're charged with 17 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, 12 counts of obstruction of justice, 8 counts of violating the Espionage Act, and numerous additional charges related to operating an illegal assassination program. How do you plead? Hale leaned toward his microphone. Not guilty, Your Honor. And I'd like to state for the record that these charges are politically motivated persecution of a patriot who served this country faithfully for 4 decades. The evidence against me was obtained through illegal means by individuals with clear bias, and your plea is noted, Judge Chen interrupted. Your statement is not. Save it for trial. Bail is denied. You'll remain in federal custody. Trial date is set for 90 days from today unless both parties agree to an extension. Your Honor, Weiss protested, 90 days is insufficient time to prepare a proper defense for charges of this magnitude. Then I suggest you work efficiently, Mr. Weiss. The prosecution is ready to proceed. I see no reason to delay justice. Judge Chen looked at the prosecution table. Does the government have any additional motions? The lead prosecutor stood, Anthony Rivera, known for his work on corruption cases. Your Honor, the government requests that all evidence recovered from the defendant's operations be declassified for use at trial. Additionally, we request permission to call witnesses from intelligence agencies who can verify the authenticity of mission logs and communications. Granted on both counts. Mr. Weiss, you'll have full access to discovery within the week. Judge Chen glanced at her calendar. We'll reconvene in 30 days for pretrial motions. Until then, Mr. Hale remains in federal custody at FCY Phoenix. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell, and the courtroom erupted in controlled chaos. Journalists rushed for the exits to file stories. Family members embraced, crying and angry and relieved all at once. Sarah sat motionless, watching as Hale was led away in handcuffs, watching as he turned one last time to look at her. You can't win, he mouthed silently. Sarah smiled and mouthed back, Watch me. Morrison appeared at her elbow. That went better than expected. Judge Chen's not playing games. But you need to know, Weiss is going to come after you hard. Your testimony is crucial, so he'll try to discredit you any way possible. Let him try, Sarah said, standing. I'm not the one on trial. Outside, the media swarm was immediate and overwhelming. Cameras, microphones, shouted questions creating a wall of noise Sarah couldn't process. Her protection detail formed a barrier, moving her toward the waiting SUV, but one voice cut through the chaos. Ms. Chen, Margaret Cross, Elliot's sister, please, just a moment. Sarah stopped, turned. Margaret pushed through the crowd, an older woman with Elliot's eyes and his determined jaw. They faced each other, and for a moment the noise faded to background static. "I wanted to thank you," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face, "for being with my brother, for making sure he didn't die alone, for carrying his truth when no one else would." "He was brave," Sarah said, her own voice breaking. "The bravest man I've ever met." "They told me he died in 1994, training accident at Fort Bragg. Gave me a flag and an empty casket and expected me to just accept it." Margaret's hands shook. "I knew something was wrong. Elliot wouldn't die in some stupid accident, but I couldn't prove anything, couldn't get answers, and eventually I had to accept it. Had to bury an empty box and pretend my brother was inside." Sarah took Margaret's hands. "He's being moved to Arlington. Full military honors. His name is being restored. Everyone's going to know what he did, what Shadow Company did. No more empty graves." Margaret pulled Sarah into a fierce embrace, and Sarah felt 30 years of grief and rage and loss pouring out of this woman who'd been denied even the truth of how her brother died. Around them, cameras captured the moment, and Sarah knew this image would be everywhere by nightfall. The nurse and the sister, united in their determination that the dead would finally be acknowledged. "Come to the burial," Margaret whispered. "Please. He'd want you there." "I'll be there," Sarah promised. The following weeks blurred into a rhythm of depositions, interviews, and endless media requests. Elena's articles kept coming, each one peeling back another layer of corruption. Offshore accounts funding black operations, politicians who'd taken money from Hale's shell companies, military brass who'd signed off on illegal missions. The story metastasized beyond Shadow Company into a comprehensive expose of institutional rot that made Watergate look simple by comparison. Sarah testified before a Senate Intelligence Committee, facing hostile questions from members who'd rather this all stayed buried. She sat across from skeptical senators and detailed everything: Elliot's condition, the combat training she'd recognized, the drive that contained evidence they couldn't ignore. Some senators clearly wanted to discredit her, paint her as an unreliable witness swept up in conspiracy theories. But others, the ones who'd spent careers fighting corruption, asked pointed questions that gave her space to tell the full story. "Ms. Chen," Senator Catherine Walsh asked, her voice cutting through the political posturing, "you're a registered nurse with 7 years' experience and no intelligence training. What made you believe a dying patient over trained doctors and federal officials?" Sarah thought about the question carefully. "Because I learned from my father, who served in Vietnam Special Forces, that sometimes the people who've been through trauma recognize truth in ways the rest of us can't." Elliot Cross wasn't delusional. He was precise, tactical, disciplined, even in his panic. That's not dementia. That's training. And when someone with that kind of background tells you he's being hunted by his own government, you don't dismiss it. You listen. And when federal agents told you to stand down, to let them handle it, I made a choice. Maybe it was naive, maybe it was reckless. But Elliot died to expose the truth, and I wasn't going to let his death be meaningless. Sarah leaned forward. "Senator, with respect, the federal agents telling me to stand down were working for the man who'd been murdering civilians for 30 years. If I'd listened to official authority, we'd still be burying this. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts over institutional credentials." Walsh nodded slowly. "Sometimes institutional credentials are just cover for institutional failure. Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Chen, and thank you for having the courage to be right when everyone else was wrong." The hearing concluded with promises of reform, oversight, accountability. Sarah didn't know if she believed the promises, but at least the questions were being asked publicly where ignoring them became impossible. Martinez was released from the hospital after 3 weeks, moving slowly but determined to testify at trial. Webb had given 14 depositions and counting, each one adding detail to the prosecution's case. Elena won a Pulitzer nomination for her reporting, though she told Sarah the recognition felt hollow when weighed against the body count her articles had revealed. And through it all, Sarah waited for trial while trying to rebuild some version of normal life. She returned to work at Mercy Hill General, expecting hostility or awkwardness. Instead, she found respect. Nurses who'd dismissed her as too soft, too emotional, now sought her advice. Doctors who'd never learned her name suddenly wanted to collaborate. The hospital administration, initially panicked about liability, had pivoted to embracing her as a symbol of their commitment to patient advocacy. Dr. Webb had resigned, unable to continue practicing while carrying the weight of testimony. He told Sarah he was considering teaching, maybe trauma counseling for veterans. Spending 30 years running from the past, he'd said. Time to spend the next 30 helping people face theirs. The trial began on a cold morning in March, 3 months after Sarah had walked into room 347 and met a dying soldier who'd changed everything. The prosecution had assembled a case that was overwhelming in scope. Financial records, mission logs, communications, testimony from 47 witnesses. Weiss fought every piece of evidence, challenged every witness, deployed every legal maneuver available. But the weight of documentation was crushing. Sarah's testimony came on day 12. Rivera walked her through the night at Mercy Hill, Elliot's condition, her recognition of his training, the moment she'd realized he wasn't confused but hyper-aware. She described the USB drive, the chase through the hospital, Hale's threats in the SUV. Weiss cross-examined with surgical precision, trying to paint her as an unreliable narrator swept up in drama. Ms. Chen, isn't it true you were suspended from your position at Mercy Hill for insubordination? I was ordered out of a patient's room. I refused because I believed he needed care, not sedation. So you admit to disregarding medical authority based on your own judgment. I admit to advocating for my patient when I believed he was being mishandled. That's not insubordination. That's nursing. Weiss shifted tactics. You claim Mr. Hale threatened you, but you have no recording, no witnesses to these alleged threats except yourself. Officer Martinez witnessed the conversation. Officer Martinez, who was unconscious when these threats allegedly occurred? Sarah kept her voice steady. The threats happened in the SUV before we returned to the library. Martinez wasn't present, but the letter left in my apartment was witnessed by FBI agents. The threat list with my name on it was corroborated by evidence from multiple sources, and Mr. Hale's pattern of eliminating witnesses is documented across 3 decades. One conversation doesn't need verification when it fits an established pattern of behavior. The Rivera redirect focused on the human cost. Ms. Chen, when you met Elliot Cross, what did you see? I saw a soldier still fighting a war, still trying to complete a mission, still carrying the weight of men who'd been erased. Sarah looked directly at the jury. I saw someone who'd been abandoned by the system that created him, someone who refused to let the truth die, even when dying himself. And I thought if he could be that brave while bleeding out, the least I could do was help him finish what he started. Did you believe his story immediately? No, I thought he might be delusional at first. But the evidence, the scars, the tactical training, the way he moved despite his injuries, that told a story medical records couldn't, so I chose to listen, to trust what I was seeing over what I was being told. And what were you being told? That he was nobody, that he didn't matter, that I should do my job and let the doctors handle it. Sarah's voice strengthened. But he wasn't nobody. He was Elliot James Cross, Shadow Company SC7, and he mattered. They all mattered. Every operator who died in those mountains, every civilian murdered to protect illegal operations, every family given lies instead of truth, they all mattered. And someone needed to stand up and say so. The courtroom was silent. Sarah could see several jurors wiping their eyes, could see Hale sitting motionless at the defense table, could see Margaret Cross in the gallery holding a photo of her brother in his dress uniform. Rivera let the moment breathe before asking his final question. Do you regret your choices that night? No, Sarah said without hesitation. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that our government operated a murder program for 30 years. I regret that Elliot had to die to expose it, but I don't regret helping him. I'd make the same choice again. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Hale never took the stand. His lawyers knew he'd be destroyed under cross-examination. The defense strategy relied on attacking the evidence chain, questioning witness credibility, claiming everything was taken out of context. But the prosecution had built a fortress of documentation, and Weiss's attacks barely scratched it. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, Sarah was seated between Martinez and Elena, all 3 of them holding hands like children facing a storm. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty? On the charge of obstruction of justice, how do you find? Guilty. 17 times the foreman said guilty. 17 times Sarah felt something in her chest release, some tension she'd been carrying since that first night in room 347. Hale sat motionless as his world collapsed, his expression never changing. But Sarah saw the moment it hit him, the realization that he'd finally encountered something he couldn't manipulate or suppress. Judge Chen accepted the verdict, set sentencing for 2 weeks. As marshals led Hale away, he looked at Sarah one final time. Not threatening anymore. Just defeated. Just a man who'd built an empire on silence and discovered that eventually, someone always spoke up. Outside the courthouse, the media circus reached its crescendo. Sarah gave one statement. Justice has been served for Shadow Company and all the victims of Victor Hale's crimes. This verdict doesn't bring back the dead, but it ensures they're finally acknowledged. That has to be enough. Sentencing came on a bright April morning. Judge Chen read the charges methodically, her voice steady as she detailed the scope of Hale's crimes. Then she looked at him directly. Mr. Hale, you operated outside law and morality for 3 decades. You murdered American citizens, erased soldiers, and corrupted institutions meant to protect justice. You showed no remorse, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, so I will show no leniency. She sentenced him to 17 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. Hale would die in federal prison, his empire dismantled, his network exposed and prosecuted. Additional trials were already being scheduled for his associates, contractors who'd carried out murders, officials who'd provided cover, lawyers who'd helped bury evidence. The system that had enabled him was being systematically torn apart. Margaret Cross hosted a small memorial service the week after sentencing. Not for burial, Elliot's remains were still being processed for Arlington, but for closure. Family members of other Shadow Company operators attended, sharing stories of brothers and sons and fathers who'd been erased. Sarah listened to their grief and their rage and their relief that finally, someone had cared enough to demand truth. My son was 23, one mother said, her voice trembling. They told me he fell during a training exercise, gave me a folded flag and a story that never made sense. For 30 years I wondered if I was crazy for doubting it, for thinking something else happened. You weren't crazy, Sarah said. You were right, and now everyone knows it. The Pentagon announced a full review of classified operations dating back to 1987. Congress passed the Shadow Company Memorial Act, establishing oversight for black operations and protection for whistleblowers. Elliot's face appeared on magazine covers, his story told in documentaries and books. The nurse who'd believed him became part of that story, but Sarah worked to keep the focus where it belonged, on the soldiers who'd been erased and the truth that had finally emerged. Arlington National Cemetery on a June morning, the sky impossibly blue and the grass impossibly green. 32 caskets in a row, some containing remains that had finally been recovered and identified, others holding only symbolic soil from the mountains where Shadow Company died. Sarah stood with Margaret Cross and the other families, watching as honor guards performed the ceremonies that had been denied for 30 years. A general Sarah didn't recognize gave a speech about sacrifice and service. She barely heard it. Her attention was on the flag being folded over Elliot's casket, on the rifle salute that cracked across the cemetery, on the bugler playing taps with such mournful beauty that several people openly wept. When they presented Margaret with Elliot's flag, Sarah saw the woman's face finally achieve something like peace. Not happiness, the grief was too deep for that, but acceptance, recognition. The knowledge that her brother had been real, had mattered, had died a hero rather than an accident statistic. After the ceremony, as families gathered around graves and shared memories, Morrison approached Sarah. I wanted you to know, we've dismantled Hale's entire network, 47 arrests across 6 states. His financial empire is being liquidated, assets frozen. The people he threatened, the operations he ran, all of it exposed and shut down. How many others were there? Sarah asked. How many operations like Shadow Company? We're still uncovering them, but the oversight mechanisms being put in place should prevent future abuses. Morrison paused. And there's something else. The Bureau wants to offer you a position, consultant role, helping us identify institutional failures in witness protection and victim advocacy. Your nursing background combined with your experience navigating bureaucracy, We think you could help prevent situations where vulnerable people get lost in the system. Sarah thought about it. Thought about returning to nursing, to the comfortable routine of shifts and patients and problems that could be solved with proper care. Then thought about Elliot dying in the dark because systems had failed him, about families who'd been lied to for decades, about victims of corruption who'd never gotten justice because no one listened. "I'm not an investigator," she said. "No, you're better. You're someone who sees people instead of cases, who recognizes when the system is failing its most vulnerable. That's exactly what we need." "Let me think about it." Morrison handed her a card. "Take your time. Offer stands whenever you're ready." Elena found her after Morrison left, looking exhausted but satisfied. "Just got word. My editor wants me to expand the Shadow Company coverage into a book. Full investigation of institutional corruption, military abuse, the works. Publisher's already interested." "You should do it," Sarah said. "The story deserves that depth." "I want you to co-author. Your perspective, your experience. It's crucial to understanding how this happened and how one person refusing to stay silent changed everything." Sarah looked at Elena, at her split lip that had healed but left a faint scar, at the determination in her eyes that said she'd never stop fighting for truth. "I'm not a writer." "You're a witness. That's more important." Elena stepped closer. "Sarah, what you did, what we did together, it matters. Not just because we stopped Hale, but because we proved that ordinary people can challenge extraordinary corruption and win. That's a story worth telling in as much detail as possible." "I'll think about it," Sarah said, the same answer she'd given Morrison. Martinez appeared, walking with a cane but moving better every day. He'd been offered a position with federal courthouse security, better pay, better benefits, recognition of his actions during the library breach. "Getting ready to head out," he said. "Just wanted to say goodbye properly, without blood loss and gunfire." Sarah hugged him carefully, mindful of his still healing injuries. "You saved my life. Multiple times. I never properly thanked you. You gave me a reason to risk it. That's thanks enough." Martinez pulled back, his expression serious. "Whatever you do next, FBI consultant, book author, back to nursing, just promise me you'll keep being the person who sees past the obvious, who listens when everyone else has decided someone doesn't matter. The world needs more of that." As the sun began to set, Sarah found herself alone at Elliot's grave. The temporary marker would eventually be replaced with proper stone, but for now it was simple. Elliot James Cross, Shadow Company. SC7, 1955 to 2025. Truth over silence. "You were right," Sarah said quietly. "About everything. About Hale, about the cover-up, about needing someone to believe you. I'm sorry it took so long for anyone to listen. Sorry you had to die to make it happen." The wind rustled through the cemetery's trees, carrying the scent of fresh earth and cut grass and the particular quiet that came from places dedicated to memory. Sarah thought about her father, buried in a different cemetery with his own secrets never shared. Thought about all the soldiers who carried weight too heavy for one person, all the families who'd been lied to, all the systems that failed the people they were supposed to protect. She pulled out her phone, called Morrison's number. "I'll take the position, but I have conditions." "Name them." "I keep my nursing license active. I work cases that involve vulnerable populations, victims, witnesses, people being intimidated into silence. And I answer to oversight that's transparent and accountable. No more secret operations with classified justifications." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Done. When can you start?" "After the book is written. Elena and I are going to document everything: Shadow Company, Hale's network, how institutional corruption functions, and how ordinary people can fight back. That story needs to be told completely before I move on to the next thing." "Fair enough. We'll be here when you're ready." Sarah ended the call and stood at Elliot's grave a moment longer. The sun was setting, painting Arlington in shades of gold and shadow, and she thought about cycles ending and beginning, about truth that stayed buried until someone chose to dig it up, about the quiet strength that came from refusing to look away when looking away would be easier. "Perimeter secure," she whispered, using the words that had become a promise between them. 6 months later, the book published to immediate acclaim. Truth Over Silence: How Shadow Company Exposed America's Secret War on Its Own Citizens, dominated bestseller lists, and sparked national conversations about accountability and oversight. Sarah and Elena toured the country, speaking at universities and government forums, telling the story of how a nurse and a journalist had taken down a decades-old conspiracy through nothing more complicated than refusing to accept official lies. Sarah's FBI consultancy focused on systemic reform, identifying where bureaucracy became barrier, where institutional protection became institutional abuse. She worked cases involving whistleblowers, witnesses in protective custody, victims of organized corruption. Every time she encountered someone being told they didn't matter, being dismissed as unreliable or unimportant, she thought of Elliot and fought harder. Martinez became head of security for the federal courthouse system's Western Division. Webb opened a counseling practice specializing in veteran trauma and moral injury. Margaret Cross established a foundation supporting families of soldiers killed in classified operations, ensuring they received truth instead of convenient fictions. And Victor Hale spent his days in a maximum security cell, his empire dismantled, his name synonymous with corruption. Appeals were filed and denied. Attempts to negotiate reduced sentences were rejected. He would die in prison, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about what happened when unchecked power met determined resistance. Sarah visited Arlington every few months, standing at Elliot's grave and updating him on progress, on trials that sent his killers to prison, on reforms that would make future shadow companies impossible, on families finally getting truth about how their loved ones really died. "You did it," she said on one visit, spring rain falling gently around her. "You exposed them. You made sure the truth survived. Everything you fought for, everything you died for, it worked." She'd never expected an answer, so she wasn't disappointed by silence. But she felt something in that quiet space between rain and remembrance, a sense of completion, of promises kept and battles won. Elliot's war was finally over, and he'd won it not through violence, but through one desperate act of trust that a stranger would care enough to listen. Sarah Chen returned to her car, to her life, to the work that stretched ahead. She'd started as a nurse dismissed as too empathetic, been forged in chaos into someone who understood that sometimes empathy was the most dangerous weapon against corruption. She carried Elliot's truth forward, made sure his sacrifice meant systemic change rather than just individual justice. And somewhere in the machinery of government being slowly reformed, in the oversight being implemented, in the whistleblower protections being strengthened, Elliot James Cross's legacy lived on. Not in monuments or medals, but in structures designed to ensure that the next time someone tried to bury inconvenient truth, there would be systems in place to stop them. Sarah drove through Arlington's gates as afternoon light painted the world in shades of possibility. Her phone buzzed. Morrison, with a new case, a witness being intimidated into silence who needed someone willing to see past official narratives. Sarah accepted it, already planning her approach, already thinking about how to help someone who felt powerless discover they had more strength than they knew. Because that was the real lesson Elliot had taught her. Not that one person could topple empires, though apparently they could, but that refusing to accept comfortable lies, choosing to stand up when staying silent would be easier, that simple act of defiance could cascade into unstoppable momentum. She'd been a nurse who saw a patient when everyone else saw a problem. That basic act of humanity had triggered everything that followed. And now she'd spend the rest of her career making sure other people received that same fundamental recognition, that they mattered, that their truth deserved to be heard, that systems existed to serve them rather than silence them. Sarah Chen merged into traffic, rain clearing to reveal blue sky, and drove toward whatever came next with the certainty that some battles were worth fighting regardless of cost, and that sometimes the quietest voices carried the most necessary truths. The war was over. Justice had been served. And the nurse who'd refused to look away when a dying soldier needed someone to believe him had become the person who made sure no one's truth would be dismissed again. That was legacy enough. That was everything.